The stone walls of Veermont Hall had witnessed 3 centuries of blood, ambition, and absolute rule. Tonight, they would witness betrayal. Duke Alaric Veermont stood alone in the Grand Council chamber, his shadow stretching across the marble floor like a dark prophecy. Around him, 12 members of the noble court formed a semicircle of judgment, their faces carved from contempt and calculation. The air tasted of expensive wine and cheaper loyalty. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The moment the untouchable Duke would finally fall. And if you think this is just another story about power and politics, stay until the end. Because what happens next will shatter everything you thought you knew about strength, control, and what it truly costs to rule. Drop a comment with your city below and hit that like button. You're going to want to remember where you were when you heard this. Lord Fenwick stepped forward first, his silk doublet straining against his prominent belly. The candlelight caught the smugness in his eyes. "You've gone too far this time, Alaric." The words dripped with false concern. Bringing that woman into the inner court, giving her access to estate documents, seating her at your right hand during the Harvest Council. Have you lost your senses entirely? Alaric's expression remained carved from granite. His hands rested calmly on the oak table before him, but anyone who truly knew him could see the lethal stillness in his posture. It was the quiet before violence, the held breath before the strike. "That woman has a name," Alaric said, his voice low and controlled, each word measured, each syllable a warning. "Elara Whitcomb, and you will use it." Lady Cordelia Ashmont laughed. It was a brittle, practiced sound, the laughter of someone who had spent decades perfecting cruelty in drawing rooms and ballrooms. "She's a commoner, Alaric. Her father was a merchant who bought his minor title with trade money. She has no lineage, no breeding, no place at your table." Cordelia's fan snapped open with the precision of a blade. "And yet you parade her through our halls like she's one of us." "She is more than most of you," Alaric replied. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. His pale gray eyes swept across the assembled lords and ladies with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating prey. "She understands loyalty, a concept that seems increasingly foreign in this room." Lord Bancroft slammed his fist on the table. His jowls shook with righteous indignation. "Loyalty? You dare speak to us of loyalty? We have served your family for generations. My grandfather fought beside your grandfather at Greymore Pass. My father managed your northern estates when your father was too drunk to do it himself. And this is how you repay that service? By elevating some merchant's daughter above us?" Alaric rose slowly. The movement was controlled, deliberate. He stood 6 feet 3 inches tall, his frame built from years of swordsmanship and riding. But it wasn't his physical presence that made lesser men step back. It was the authority that radiated from him like heat from a forge. The absolute certainty that he could destroy you with a word or a gesture. That your life, your title, your legacy existed only because he allowed it. "Your grandfather served for gold and land grants," Alaric said quietly. "Your father managed those estates because he was skimming profits and needed to cover his theft. Don't dress up self-interest as loyalty, Bancroft. It insults us both." Bancroft's face turned purple. Around the room, shocked whispers rippled through the assembled nobles like wind through dead leaves. "How dare you?" Bancroft sputtered. "How dare I?" Alaric's voice remained eerily calm. "I dare because I am Duke of Veermont. I dare because every acre you stand on, every privilege you enjoy, every breath you take in my territory exists because my family built this realm from blood and iron. So yes, Bancroft, I dare." Lord Tremaine, the eldest of the council, stepped forward. His age gave him a certain diplomatic immunity. 83 years of navigating court politics had taught him how to deliver poison with honey. "Alaric," he said gently, "we are concerned for you. This woman, this Elara, she has clouded your judgment. We've all seen it. You were once the most ruthless, most calculated lord in 3 provinces. Men trembled at your name. Now you're distracted, soft. The northern border lords are already whispering that Veermont has lost his edge." Alaric walked slowly toward Tremaine. His boots clicked against the marble with metronomic precision. When he spoke, his voice was silk over steel. "Let me tell you what softness is, Lord Tremaine. Softness is believing that the same power structure that served my grandfather will serve me in a changing world. Softness is clinging to tradition because you're too afraid to adapt. Softness is gathering in the dark to question your duke instead of trusting his vision." He stopped inches from the old man's face. "I'm not soft," I am evolving. And if you cannot evolve with me, you will be left behind. The chamber fell silent. This was the Alaric they knew, the one who could flay you with words before he ever drew a blade. But there was something different now, something the court couldn't quite identify. A crack in the armor, a hint of something beneath the ice. Lady Cordelia seized the moment. "Then let us speak plainly," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You're besotted, a Duke of Viramont acting like a lovesick boy. It's humiliating, for you and for all of us." Alaric turned to face her. His expression revealed nothing. "You mistake conviction for infatuation, Cordelia, a common error among those who've never experienced either." The barb landed. Cordelia's face tightened. Her marriage to Lord Ashmont was notoriously cold, a political arrangement that had produced 3 children and 30 years of mutual contempt. "We're not questioning your right to bed whomever you choose," Lord Fenwick interjected, trying to regain control of the conversation. "We're questioning your judgment in elevating her to a position of influence. The other noble houses are watching. They see weakness, vulnerability. They see change," Alaric corrected. "And change terrifies men who've built their entire existence on stagnation." Lord Vancourt, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. He was younger than most of the council, 43, ambitious, and known for his strategic mind. "You've denied Lady Helena Ashford 3 times now," he said quietly. "The daughter of the Duke of Eastmarch. An alliance that would have secured our eastern borders and brought considerable wealth to Viramont, all because of Alara Whitcomb." "Yes," Alaric said simply. "That's madness," Vancourt continued. "Helena is educated, bred for leadership, connected to half the powerful families in the realm. What does this merchant's daughter offer that justifies such a loss?" Alaric's jaw tightened. For the first time that evening, a flicker of real emotion crossed his face. "She offers truth. In a court of liars, she offers honesty. In a world of political calculation, she offers genuine feeling. And yes, Vancourt, that is worth more than all of Helena Ashford's bloodline and dowry combined." The room erupted. Voices overlapped in a cacophony of outrage and disbelief. "This is unprecedented! The Duke has lost his mind! We cannot allow this!" Alaric's voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. Silence. The word reverberated off the stone walls. The nobles fell quiet immediately. Years of conditioning, of responding to that tone of absolute command, overrode their indignation. "I did not summon you here to seek your permission," Alaric said coldly. "I summoned you to inform you of a decision already made. Alara Whitcomb will remain at court. She will sit at my right hand during councils. She will have access to whatever resources and information I deem appropriate. And if any of you take action against her, directly or indirectly, I will consider it an act of treason against my house." Lord Bancroft's face had gone from purple to white. "You're threatening us? Your own council?" "I'm clarifying consequences," Alaric replied. "An important distinction." Lady Cordelia's voice shook with barely controlled rage. "The other houses won't stand for this. When word spreads that Duke Viramont has chosen a nobody over proper alliance marriages, over noble daughters who've been groomed their entire lives for such a position, they will see you as weak, foolish, ruled by base desires instead of strategic thinking. Then they will underestimate me," Alaric said with a thin smile. "And we all know how that typically ends." It was a reference everyone in the room understood. 3 years ago, the Northern Coalition had underestimated Alaric's willingness to act decisively. They'd assumed his youth meant hesitation. They'd been wrong. The rebellion had been crushed in 6 weeks. 2 lords had lost their heads. 3 others had lost their lands. The lesson had been taught in blood and fire. "But this is different," Lord Tremaine insisted. "This isn't about military strategy or political maneuvering. This is about the foundation of noble society. Lineage, bloodline, the preservation of power through careful breeding and alliance. You're threatening all of that for one woman." "No," Alaric said quietly. "I'm threatening it because it's already dying. You're just too blind to see the corpse." The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples of shock spread through the council. "What are you saying?" Vancourt demanded. "I'm saying the world is changing. The merchant class grows stronger every year. Trade routes bring more wealth than land grants. Education is spreading beyond noble houses. The very foundation you're clinging to is cracking beneath your feet. And instead of adapting, you're clutching at tradition like it's a life raft on a sinking ship. Alaric began to pace, his movements controlled but purposeful. Elara Whitcomb represents that new world. She was educated by tutors her father hired with merchant gold. She understands commerce, negotiation, and adaptation in ways none of your carefully bred daughters ever could. She is the future, and I will not sacrifice the future to appease the past. Lord Fenwick's laugh was ugly. Pretty words. But we know the truth. You're not thinking about the future of Viermont. You're thinking about getting her into your bed. Or perhaps you already have. The temperature in the room plummeted. Alaric stopped pacing. He turned slowly toward Fenwick. The look in his eyes made the portly lord take an involuntary step backward. "Repeat that," Alaric said softly. Fenwick's courage, never particularly robust, evaporated. "I simply meant that, well, appearances suggest—" "Appearances," Alaric interrupted, his voice like winter frost, "suggest that a group of aging nobles are so terrified of their own irrelevance that they've gathered to attack a woman they've never bothered to know. Because knowing her would require acknowledging she's smarter than most of you, more principled than all of you, and far more valuable to this realm than your combined lineages." He walked back to the head of the table and placed both palms flat on the surface, leaning forward. "Here is what will happen. You will return to your estates. You will cease your whisper campaigns and your petty conspiracies. You will show Elara the basic courtesy her position demands. And if I hear one more word, one more insinuation, one more breath of disrespect toward her, I will personally ensure that your family's next generation remembers this moment as the beginning of your house's decline." Lady Cordelia found her voice, though it wavered. "And if we refuse, then test me," Alaric said simply. "See how that works out." The silence that followed was absolute. Every person in that room understood they were staring at a man who had reached a line he would not cross back over. The Duke they had known, the one who calculated every move for maximum political advantage, would have negotiated, would have found compromise, would have maintained the appearance of consensus even while maneuvering to his preferred outcome. This Duke was different. This Duke had found something he would not compromise on, and that made him far more dangerous than the calculating strategist they'd grown accustomed to. Lord Tremaine spoke carefully, his words chosen with the precision of a man walking through a minefield. "You realize what you're doing? By making this stand, by drawing this line, you're fracturing relationships that have held for generations. You're creating enemies where there were once allies." "No," Alaric corrected. "I'm revealing enemies who pretended to be allies. There's a difference." Bancroft tried one last time. "The king himself will hear of this. When the crown learns you've rejected suitable marriages, elevated a commoner, and threatened your own counsel over her, there will be consequences." Alaric's smile was cold. "The king is currently drowning in debt from his latest war. He needs my tax revenue and my military support far more than he needs another scandal among his dukes. Send him a letter if you wish. Include my warmest regards." It was a calculated gamble, but Alaric knew the odds. King Edward III was indeed financially overextended. A conflict with one of his most powerful and reliable dukes would be politically costly. The king would likely ignore the situation unless it threatened his own interests directly. Vancourt, who had been watching the exchange with sharp eyes, spoke up. "This isn't just about Elara Whitcomb, is it? There's something else. Something you're not telling us." Alaric regarded the younger lord with something approaching respect. Vancourt's intelligence was precisely why he was dangerous. "You're right," Alaric acknowledged. "This is about something larger. This is about what kind of realm we're building. One that clings to the past until it strangles us, or one that evolves to meet the future. I've chosen evolution. The question for each of you is whether you'll evolve with me or be left behind as relics." "And what happens to relics in your new world?" Lady Cordelia asked bitterly. "They're placed in museums," Alaric replied, "admired for what they once were, but no longer relevant to the present." The insult was deliberate and devastating. Around the room, faces hardened with resentment and rage. But beneath the anger, there was something else. Fear. Because they recognized the truth in his words. The world was changing. Merchant wealth was beginning to rival noble fortunes. Education was spreading, old certainties were crumbling. And Duke Alaric Viermont, instead of fighting that tide, had chosen to ride it. Lord Fenwick gathered what remained of his dignity. "This council is concluded, then? You've made your position clear and have no interest in our council?" "On the contrary," Alaric said, "I'm very interested in your council. On trade agreements, border security, agricultural yields, all the actual work of governance. What I'm not interested in is your opinions on my personal life or your desperate attempts to maintain a social order that's already collapsing. He straightened, his posture once again that of absolute authority. You're dismissed, all of you. And let me be perfectly clear. The next time we meet in this chamber, it will be because I've summoned you for legitimate matters of state. If I hear whispers of tonight's conversation spreading beyond these walls, if I catch even a hint of retaliation against Alara, you will discover exactly how ruthless I can still be when properly motivated. The nobles filed out in silence, their expressions ranging from fury to fear to calculation. Only Lord Tremaine paused at the door. You were always the smartest of the young lords, he said quietly. The most strategic. But intelligence without wisdom is just clever destruction. I hope you know what you're doing. So do I, Alaric replied honestly. When the door closed behind the last lord, Alaric remained standing at the head of the table. His hands gripped the wood hard enough that his knuckles went white. The mask of absolute control he'd maintained throughout the confrontation finally cracked. He'd just made powerful enemies. Men and women who would spend the coming weeks plotting his downfall, who would spread poison throughout the court, who would seek alliances with his rivals and whisper to the king's advisors. All for a woman who had walked into his life 6 months ago and shattered every certainty he'd built his existence upon. The door opened quietly. Alaric didn't turn. He knew her footsteps, the particular rhythm of her approach, the way she moved through space with neither apology nor aggression, just presence. I heard shouting, Alara said. Her voice was calm, measuring. She never asked questions she didn't want answers to. They're concerned about my judgment, Alaric replied. He still didn't turn around. Afraid I've gone soft. Alara walked around the table until she stood across from him. Even now, even in private, she maintained the boundary, never presuming, never assuming privilege she hadn't earned. And have you? He finally looked at her. Really looked at her. Alara Whitcomb was not conventionally beautiful in the way court ladies were trained to be. Her features were too sharp, her gaze too direct. She didn't lower her eyes in the presence of power, didn't soften her words to please male egos, didn't perform the delicate dance of feminine deference that noble daughters learned from birth. Instead, she stood there in a simple dress of deep green wool, her dark hair pulled back practically rather than fashionably, and met his eyes with the level assessment of an equal. No, he said quietly. I haven't gone soft, but I've stopped pretending that the old ways are the only ways. She studied him for a long moment. They'll come for me, you know. Not directly. They're too afraid of you for that. But they'll find ways. Rumors, accidents, social destruction so complete that staying at court becomes impossible. I know, Alaric said. And yet you stood there tonight and drew a line you can't uncross. Yes. Why? The question hung between them. It was the same question the council had asked in a dozen different ways. The question he'd been asking himself for months. Why risk everything? His political alliances, his family's expectations, the stability of his rule. For one woman who owed him nothing and had never asked for his protection? Because I'm tired of living in a cage of other people's expectations, he said finally. Because every day I wake up and perform the role of Duke Alaric Viremont, ruthless strategist, perfect nobleman, heir to 3 centuries of brutal efficiency. And every day I feel like I'm suffocating in that role. He moved around the table toward her. And then you walked into my council chamber 6 months ago with a trade proposal your father was too sick to deliver himself. And you stood there, this merchant's daughter, with no title and no power, and you told me my tariff structure was economically unsound. To my face. In front of my advisors. A slight smile touched Alara's lips. It was economically unsound. You were right, Alaric continued. And instead of having you thrown out for insolence, I found myself actually listening. Because you weren't performing for me, weren't trying to manipulate me with flattery or fear. You were just telling me the truth as you saw it. And I realized I was surrounded by people who would never do that, who were so busy playing political games that truth had become irrelevant. He stopped in front of her close enough to touch but still maintaining distance. You're dangerous to me, Alara. Not because you're trying to be, but because you make me question everything I thought I knew about power and control and what actually matters. And that terrifies them. Does it terrify you? She asked quietly. Yes, he admitted, because I don't know how this ends. I don't know if I can protect you from what's coming. I don't know if I'm strong enough to change this world the way it needs to be changed. All I know is that I can't go back to the way things were. I can't unsee what you've shown me. And what have I shown you? That power without purpose is just tyranny. That control without trust is just fear. That I've spent my entire life building walls to keep people at a distance, and those walls have become a prison. Alara reached out slowly and placed her hand over his where it rested on the table. Then we tear down the walls, she said simply. Together. It was the first time she'd touched him outside of formal greetings. The contact sent electricity through his entire body. Not sexual desire, though that was present. Something deeper. Recognition. The sense of finding something he'd been missing without knowing he was incomplete. They'll destroy you for this, she said. Your family will disown you. The court will turn on you. The king may intervene. Everything you've built could come crashing down. I know, Alaric said. And you're willing to risk it? He turned his hand beneath hers, palm to palm, fingers interlacing. I'm willing to risk it for the chance to build something better, not just for us, for everyone trapped in this dying system. Alara's expression shifted. For the first time since he'd known her, genuine emotion cracked through her careful control. Do you understand what you're asking me to carry? If I stay, if I accept this position you're forcing on me, I become a symbol. Everything we do will be scrutinized. Every failure will be proof that you were wrong. Every success will be dismissed as your manipulation. I'll be the weapon they use to destroy you. Then we'd better not fail, Alaric said. She pulled her hand back, breaking contact, began to pace, her mind working through scenarios and consequences with the same strategic precision he recognized in himself. The other nobles will form alliances against you. Bancroft has connections to the western provinces. Cordelia's family controls 3 major trade routes. Tremaine's age gives him influence with the older generation. Vancourt is ambitious enough to see this as his opportunity to rise. All true, Alaric acknowledged. Your brother will use this against you. He's been waiting for an opening to challenge your position as primary heir. Also true. And Lady Helena Ashford's father, the Duke of Eastmarch, will be furious that you've rejected his daughter 3 times. He may seek alliance with your enemies just for revenge. Extremely likely. Alara stopped pacing and faced him. So your plan is what exactly? To stand against the combined forces of noble tradition, family pressure, political ambition, and wounded pride with nothing but conviction? No, Alaric said calmly. My plan is to stand against all of that with conviction, strategic intelligence, and you. That's insane. Probably. It will never work. It might not. We could lose everything. Yes. She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of doubt or delusion, finding only absolute certainty. You're serious, she said. It wasn't a question, completely. Why me? She asked again, more urgently this time. I'm nobody. A merchant's daughter with some education and opinions. There are dozens of women more suitable, more connected, more prepared for this role. Because none of them are you, Alaric said simply. None of them would have told me my tariff structure was wrong. None of them would stand here now questioning my judgment instead of just accepting the privilege. None of them challenge me to be better instead of just more powerful. He stepped closer. I don't need someone suitable, Alara. I need someone real. Someone who sees past the title and the authority to the man underneath. Someone who makes me want to be worthy of something more than fear and obligation. And you think I'm that person? I know you are. She turned away, her shoulders tense. You're putting too much faith in me. I'm not some noble savior here to fix the aristocracy. I'm just trying to survive in a world that wasn't built for people like me. That's exactly why you're the right person, Alaric said. Because you understand what it's like to exist outside the system. To have to fight for every bit of respect and recognition. The nobles in that council chamber, they were born into their privilege. They've never questioned it because they've never had to. But you've seen both sides. You know the cost of this system in ways they never will. Alara's laugh was bitter. And that knowledge will protect us how exactly? Against political maneuvering and centuries of entrenched power? It won't, Alaric admitted. But it will guide us. Help us build something different. Something better. You keep saying that. Something better. But what does that actually look like? Alaric began to pace now, his strategic mind engaging fully. A realm where merit matters as much as bloodline. Where economic contribution is valued alongside noble lineage. Where the merchant class that's actually generating wealth has a voice in governance. Where women like you don't have to fight twice as hard for half as much respect. Beautiful ideals, Alara said. But ideals don't win political wars. No, Alaric agreed. Strategy wins political wars. And here's what they don't understand. They think I'm acting on impulse, on desire, that I've lost my strategic edge. But everything I've done tonight was calculated. Alara's eyes sharpened. Explain. By forcing the confrontation tonight, I've made them show their hand. I know exactly who my enemies are now. No more pretending, no more false alliances. Everyone's position is clear. He continued, warming to the strategic analysis. Bancroft is too cautious to move first. He'll wait to see which way the wind blows. Cordelia has influence, but no real power base. She'll need allies. Tremaine is old and traditional, but not actively malicious. He can be reasoned with. Vancourt is the dangerous one. Young, ambitious, intelligent. He'll be the one to watch. So you're using me as bait, Alara said flatly. No, Alaric said firmly. I'm using their prejudice against you as a strategic advantage. There's a difference. Is there? He stopped pacing and faced her directly. Bait implies you're expendable, that I'm willing to sacrifice you for a larger goal. But you're not bait, Alara. You're the goal. Everything else is just clearing the path to a world where we can both exist as we actually are, instead of as they expect us to be. Pretty words again. Yes, Alaric acknowledged, but also true words. Both can exist simultaneously. Alara was quiet for a long moment, her analytical mind working through the layers of strategy and risk. If I do this, if I stay and we fight this fight together, I need you to understand something. I'm not a prize to be won. I'm not a symbol to be displayed. I'm a person with my own goals and my own agency. Whatever we build as equals, not as Duke and his elevated commoner, as partners. Agreed, Alaric said without hesitation. And if at any point this becomes about your ego or your power or your need to prove something, I walk away. I won't be used to salve your conscience or demonstrate your progressive ideals. Fair. And, she continued, her voice hardening, if you expect me to play the role of grateful lover who owes you everything, who exists to support and admire you, this ends now. Alaric smiled. It was a genuine expression, not the cold mask he showed the court. If I wanted a grateful lover who existed to support and admire me, I'd have accepted Helena Ashford. She's been trained for exactly that role since birth. I want a partner who challenges me, who calls me on my mistakes, who's smart enough to see through my strategies and bold enough to tell me when I'm wrong. And you think you can handle that? Having someone with actual power over you? I think I'm terrified of it, Alaric admitted. I've spent my entire life being the person with all the power in every relationship, knowing I can control outcomes through position and authority. But with you, I can't do that. You're not impressed by my title. You don't need my protection. You could walk away tomorrow and build a life without me. Then why would I stay? Alara asked. That's what I'm hoping you'll tell me. She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. I'll stay because I'm tired of fighting alone, because I've spent my entire life proving myself to people who will never see me as worthy. Because maybe, just maybe, if we can actually pull this off, we can create space for others like me, other outsiders who deserve a chance. She stepped closer. But mostly I'll stay because underneath all your aristocratic conditioning and strategic maneuvering, I see someone as trapped as I am, just in a different kind of cage, and I think we might be strong enough together to break free of both. Alaric felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten it was there. Then we have an accord, he said. We have an accord, she repeated. They stood there in the empty council chamber, two people who'd just committed to overturning centuries of tradition. The magnitude of what they'd agreed to hung between them. They'll come for us with everything they have, Alara said quietly. I know. We might not survive it. Possible. And even if we do, we'll be changed. This fight will cost us things we can't get back. Yes. She held out her hand, formal and deliberate. Then let's make sure it's worth the cost. He took her hand, the grip firm and equal. Together, he said. Together, she agreed. Outside the chamber in the dark corridors of Viermont Hall, the first seeds of conspiracy were already being planted. Lord Bancroft was drafting a letter to the Duke of Eastmarch. Lady Cordelia was composing careful messages to her allies in the western provinces. Lord Vancourt was reviewing property records and financial documents, looking for leverage. The machine of aristocratic power was turning, grinding toward confrontation. But in the council chamber, Duke Alaric Viermont and Alara Whitcomb stood together, having just declared war on the very system that had created them both. Neither harbored illusions about the difficulty ahead. Neither pretended this would be anything but brutal. But for the first time in his life, Alaric felt like he was fighting for something that mattered beyond duty and obligation. And for the first time in her life, Alara felt like she might have found an ally worthy of her trust. The real battle was just beginning, and as the candles burned low in the Grand Council chamber, neither of them could have predicted just how high the cost would climb or how deep the betrayals would cut. But that revelation was still 3 weeks away. 3 weeks until Alaric's own brother made his move. 3 weeks until Alara discovered the depth of Lady Cordelia's cruelty. 3 weeks until the Duke of Eastmarch arrived at Viermont Hall with an ultimatum that would shake the entire realm. 3 weeks until the night everything burned down, and they had to choose between power and principle. But tonight, in this moment, they were united, ready, and completely unprepared for the fact that their greatest enemy wouldn't come from the noble council or rival houses. It would come from inside Viermont Hall itself, from someone who'd been waiting in the shadows for years. Someone who knew every one of Alaric's weaknesses. Someone who'd just realized that Alara Whitcomb was the key to destroying Duke Viermont once and for all. The morning after the council meeting broke cold and gray over Viermont Hall. Frost clung to the windows like accusations, and the servants moved through the corridors with unusual silence. They could feel it, the shift in the air, the way power dynamics were realigning like continental plates before an earthquake. Alaric stood in his private study, staring at documents he couldn't focus on. He'd slept maybe 2 hours. His mind kept replaying the confrontation, analyzing every word, every expression, searching for the strategic errors he knew he'd made. Because there had been errors. There always were when emotion entered the equation. And that was the problem, wasn't it? For the first time in his adult life, he'd made a major political decision based partially on feeling rather than pure calculation. The old Alaric would have found a way to keep Alara close while maintaining the appearance of proper noble protocols. Would have maneuvered the situation so everyone got what they wanted, or at least thought they did. But he was tired of maneuvering, tired of the endless performance, and that exhaustion was its own kind of weakness. The door opened without a knock. Only one person in Viermont Hall had that privilege. Marcus Viermont entered with the casual arrogance of a younger brother who'd spent his entire life in someone else's shadow and had learned to weaponize resentment. He was 31, 2 years younger than Alaric, and shared the same gray eyes and dark hair. But where Alaric carried authority like a second skin, Marcus wore ambition like ill-fitting armor. "Heard you had quite the evening," Marcus said, pouring himself whiskey from the crystal decanter. It was 9 in the morning. That told Alaric everything about his brother's current state of mind. News travels fast. When you threaten half the noble council over a merchant's daughter, yeah, it tends to make the rounds. Marcus dropped into the leather chair across from Alaric's desk without invitation. "So, what's the play here, brother? Are you actually planning to make her your duchess, or is this just an extended way to prove you're in charge?" Alaric set down his pen with deliberate care. The question sounded casual, but he knew his brother too well. Marcus was probing for information he could use later. "My intentions regarding Alara are none of your concern." Marcus laughed. It was an ugly sound. "Everything you do is my concern. When the Duke of Viermont makes decisions that threaten our family's standing, that becomes very much my business. Or did you forget that I'm next in line if you manage to get yourself stripped of the title?" There it was, the real reason for this morning visit. Marcus positioning himself for a potential power grab. "You've been waiting for this," Alaric said quietly. "For me to make a mistake big enough that you could justify moving against me." "I've been waiting for you to stop pretending you're infallible," Marcus corrected. "You've ruled this province like a tyrant for 8 years, making decisions without consultation, cutting people out who disagree with you, building your little empire of fear, and everyone just accepted it because you were effective." He leaned forward, whiskey glass balanced on his knee. "But now you're not being effective, you're being reckless, and that changes things." Alaric studied his brother with the cold assessment he reserved for potential threats. Marcus had always been the charming one, the personable one, the brother who knew everyone's name and remembered their children's birthdays. He'd cultivated relationships throughout the province that Alaric had ignored in favor of raw authority. It was a different kind of power, and potentially just as dangerous. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want you to come to your senses." Send the girl home. Apologize to the council. Marry Helena Ashford like you should have done months ago. Stabilize the situation before it gets worse. And if I don't? Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then I'll be forced to explore other options. For the good of the family. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You're not the only Viremont, Alaric, and you're certainly not the only one capable of leading this house. Some might argue I'd actually be better at it. I understand people in ways you never have. I build bridges instead of burning them. You build bridges made of lies and false promises, Alaric said flatly. People like you because you tell them what they want to hear. That's not leadership. That's performance, says the man who just risked everything for a woman he's known for 6 months. You want to lecture me about performance? The accusation stung because it contained truth. But Alaric had learned long ago not to show vulnerability to his brother. Marcus collected weaknesses the way some men collected art. We're done here, Alaric said. Are we? Because I don't think we are. Marcus stood slowly, setting his glass down with exaggerated care. I think we're just getting started, brother. You've opened a door you can't close. And now everyone's watching to see what you'll do next. He walked to the door, then paused. Fair warning, I've been approached by certain members of the council. They're asking questions about succession protocols, about what would happen if the current duke was deemed unfit to rule. I've been non-committal so far, but that won't last forever. The threat was explicit now. Marcus was positioning himself as the alternative, the reasonable Viremont who could restore stability and traditional order. Get out, Alaric said quietly. Marcus smiled and left without another word. Alaric remained seated for a long moment after the door closed, his hands gripped tight on the arms of his chair. His own brother. He'd expected opposition from the council, from rival houses, even from the king's advisors. But he'd underestimated Marcus's willingness to capitalize on this moment. It was a strategic blindness born from familiarity. He'd spent so long viewing his brother as a minor annoyance rather than a genuine threat that he'd failed to see the foundation Marcus had been building. The realization settled over him like cold water. This fight wasn't going to be won through authority and intimidation. Those tools had worked for 8 years, but they were insufficient now. He needed to outmaneuver opponents on multiple fronts simultaneously, and he was already starting from a compromised position. A knock at the door. This one properly announced. Enter. Thomas Blackwell, his steward and one of the few people in Viremont Hall he actually trusted, stepped inside. Thomas was 57, gray-haired, and possessed the sort of unflappable competence that came from 30 years of managing noble household chaos. My lord, we have a situation. Of course we do. What now? Lady Helena Ashford arrived an hour ago. She's in the east drawing room. She's requesting an audience. Alaric's jaw tightened. This was exactly the kind of complication he didn't need. Did she say why she's here? Thomas's expression was carefully neutral. She said she's come to accept your proposal. The one you apparently made 3 months ago before withdrawing it. Alaric closed his eyes briefly. He'd never made an official proposal to Helena, but her father had been pushing for one, and Alaric had made diplomatic noises that could be interpreted as interest. It was standard noble maneuvering, keeping options open without committing. But now Helena was here, forcing the issue publicly, which meant her father had sent her as a strategic move. If Alaric rejected her in person, in his own house, it would be a grave insult, one that could turn the Duke of Eastmarch from neutral party to active enemy. Tell Lady Helena I'll receive her in 30 minutes. Thomas nodded and left. Alaric stood and moved to the window. Outside, the grounds of Viremont Hall stretched toward the forest in carefully manicured perfection. Everything ordered, everything controlled. The physical manifestation of how he'd run his life. And now it was all coming apart because he'd chosen one woman over the entire system. The question that kept circling his mind was whether Alara was worth it, not in some romantic abstract sense, but in cold strategic terms. Was the potential of what they could build together worth the certain cost of what he would lose? He didn't have an answer yet, and that uncertainty was its own kind of torment. 28 minutes later, he entered the east drawing room to find Helena Ashford standing by the window in a dress of pale blue silk that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. She was beautiful in the specific way noble daughters were beautiful, carefully maintained, strategically presented, every hair in place, every gesture measured for maximum effect. Lady Helena, Alaric said with a formal bow. This is unexpected. She turned with a practiced smile. Is it? I thought my father's letters had made our intentions clear. Your father's intentions, perhaps, but not yours. A flicker of something crossed her face. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. My intentions align with my family's, as any proper daughter should. Helena moved away from the window with the gliding walk they taught noble girls. How to enter a room, how to sit, how to make every movement an aesthetic performance. But I didn't come here to discuss propriety, she continued. I came because I heard certain rumors about you and a merchant's daughter, and I wanted to hear the truth from you directly. Alaric's expression revealed nothing. The truth is that Miss Whitcomb is a valued advisor whose insights have proven invaluable to my governance. Helena's laugh was musical and completely artificial. Please don't insult my intelligence with political language, Alaric. We both know what's really happening here. You've developed feelings for an inappropriate woman, and now you're in a difficult position. She sat down on the velvet settee and arranged her skirts with precise movements. But here's what you need to understand. Feelings are temporary. Political alliances are permanent. Whatever infatuation you're experiencing will fade. It always does. But an alliance between Viramont and Eastmarch would strengthen both our houses for generations. And that's what you're offering? An alliance? I'm offering you a way out, Helena said bluntly. Marry me. Send the merchant girl away with enough gold to keep her comfortable. We'll never speak of this again. Your counsel will be satisfied. My father will be satisfied. And you can return to the business of actually governing instead of creating scandals. Alaric walked to the sideboard and poured himself water, not wine or whiskey. He needed absolute clarity for this conversation. That's a very pragmatic proposal. I'm a very pragmatic woman. I was raised to be. My father made sure I understood that marriage in our world is a business arrangement. Love is a pleasant bonus if it occurs, but never the foundation. She stood and approached him with deliberate steps. I could make you happy, Alaric. I'm educated, well-connected, trained for exactly this role. I know how to manage a great house, how to navigate court politics, how to be the perfect partner to a powerful duke. Everything you're saying is true, Alaric acknowledged. Then why hesitate? He turned to face her fully. Because you just described yourself as a business transaction, a strategic asset. And while I appreciate your honesty, it reinforces exactly why I can't marry you. Helena's composure cracked slightly. You'd rather have passion and chaos than stability and partnership? I'd rather have honesty than performance. And Alara Whitcomb, whatever her other qualities, has never lied to me about who she is or what she wants. Can you say the same? The question landed like a slap. Helena's eyes hardened. You're a fool. You're throwing away power and security for a woman who will never fit in your world, who will always be an outsider, who will make every day of your political life harder. Probably, Alaric agreed, but she'll never pretend to be something she's not to secure a title. And that's worth more than all the strategic marriages in the realm. Helena's mask dropped completely now. The practiced beauty was replaced by cold fury. My father warned me you were arrogant, that you believed yourself above the rules that govern the rest of us. I didn't believe him. I thought underneath the brutality was a man of reason. She grabbed her gloves from the side table with sharp movements. But he was right. You're drunk on your own power. And when this all comes crashing down, when your merchant whore has destroyed your reputation and your brother has taken your title, don't expect sympathy from Eastmarch. Alaric's voice remained level despite the insult. I wouldn't dream of it. Helena swept toward the door, then turned back. One more thing. Lady Cordelia asked me to deliver a message. She said to tell you that the wheels are already turning, that you may have won the battle in the council chamber, but the war is far from over. Then she was gone in a rustle of expensive silk and barely contained rage. Alaric stood alone in the drawing room, the echo of Helena's fury still vibrating in the air. He'd just made another enemy, another powerful house that would now actively work against him. The strategic part of his brain was cataloging the damage. Eastmarch controlled key trade routes. They had influence with the king's treasury. An alliance with them would have secured his eastern borders and brought significant wealth to Viramont. All sacrificed, all burned. For what? The door opened again. This time without permission or announcement. Alara stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. I saw Lady Helena leaving. She looked upset. I imagined she was. Alara entered the room and closed the door behind her. Let me guess. She offered you a way out of this mess. Marry her, send me away, restore order to the universe. Something like that. And you refused. Wasn't a question, but Alaric answered anyway. Yes. Alara walked to the window and stared out at the grounds. Her posture was tense. You need to stop doing that. Stop doing what? Making grand gestures on my behalf. I never asked you to reject Helena Ashford. I never asked you to threaten your counsel. I never asked for any of this. She turned to face him, and for the first time he saw real anger in her eyes. You keep acting like you're protecting me, but what you're actually doing is painting a target on my back. Every person you reject, every alliance you burn, every tradition you break, it all gets blamed on me. I'm the corrupting influence, the manipulative outsider who's destroying Duke Viremont from within. You think I don't know that? Alaric shot back. You think I'm blind to the political reality? Every move I make, they'll twist it into proof that you're the problem. Then stop making those moves. Alara's voice rose. Be smart about this. Play the game instead of flipping over the board. I'm tired of the game. Well, I'm tired of being your symbolic rebellion. If you want to destroy your life fighting the aristocracy, that's your choice. But don't drag me into it and pretend you're doing it for me. The words hit harder than any of the day's previous attacks because they came from the one person whose opinion actually mattered. Is that what you think this is? Alaric asked quietly. A symbolic rebellion? What else could it be? You've known me for 6 months. We're not in love. We haven't made promises. We're barely friends at this point. So why are you willing to risk everything? Because you're right, Alaric said. The honesty of it surprised even him. This isn't about you specifically. It's about what you represent. The possibility that there's a way out of the cage I've been living in. The chance to build something that isn't just the same tired system with a new coat of paint. He moved closer, his voice intense. I've spent 33 years being Duke Alaric Viremont, playing the role perfectly, making the strategic marriages, forming the right alliances, crushing opposition with calculated brutality. And I'm good at it, but I hate it. I hate what it's turned me into. And when you walked into my council chamber and treated me like a person instead of a title, it broke something open. So yes, Alara, this is partly symbolic. This is me choosing to fight for the possibility of being human instead of just being powerful. And if that makes me selfish, so be it. Alara stared at him for a long moment. You're using me as an excuse, a justification for the changes you want to make. And that's not fair. You're right. It's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. Not to you. Not to the people who'll get caught in the crossfire. But it's happening anyway, because I can't go back to the way things were. That door's closed. The silence stretched between them, filled with truth and resentment, and something that might eventually become understanding. Then we need to establish boundaries, Alara said finally. Clear ones, because I won't be your symbol or your excuse. If we're going to do this, if we're going to actually fight this fight, it has to be as equals, not as Duke and his project. Agreed. That means you consult me before making decisions that affect my life. You don't reject marriage proposals or threaten counsels on my behalf without discussing it first. Fair. And you stop treating this like some romantic crusade. This is politics. Brutal, ugly politics. We need strategy, not grand gestures. Alaric felt something shift in his chest. Relief, maybe. Because this was the Alara he'd first met. The one who saw situations clearly and didn't flinch from hard truths. So we stop being dramatic and start being smart, he said. Exactly. Can I ask you something? She nodded. If you're not doing this for romantic reasons, and I'm not doing it for purely altruistic ones, what's actually holding us together right now? Alara considered the question seriously. Mutual self-interest, probably. You need someone who sees the system clearly enough to help you change it. I need someone with enough power to actually make changes possible. It's a partnership built on pragmatism, not passion. That's a depressing way to describe it. It's an honest way to describe it, and honesty is what we need right now. She moved to the door, then paused. But for what it's worth, I don't hate you. And I think if we manage to not destroy each other in the next few weeks, we might actually become friends. High praise, Alaric said dryly. It's the truth, which is more than most people in this hall will give you. She left without waiting for a response. Alaric stood alone again, processing the conversation. Alara was right about almost everything. He had been making grand gestures, had been using her as justification for changes he'd wanted to make anyway, had been treating this like a romantic rebellion instead of the political war it actually was. But underneath all that, there was something else, something he wasn't ready to examine too closely yet, a recognition that in Alara Whitcomb he'd found someone who could match him, who wasn't intimidated by his authority or seduced by his power, who saw him clearly and still chose to stay. That was worth fighting for, even if neither of them could name it yet. The rest of the day dissolved into meetings and damage control. Thomas briefed him on the servants' gossip, which was already spinning out of control. Half the staff thought Alara was a witch who'd enchanted the Duke. The other half thought she was a gold digger who'd seduced him for status. None of them saw her as what she actually was. A complicated woman caught in an impossible situation, trying to navigate forces far beyond her control. Evening fell over Viremont Hall like a sentence. Alaric stood in his private chambers, reviewing correspondence that had arrived throughout the day. Letters from minor nobles testing the waters. Inquiries from merchants about trade agreements. A formal complaint from the Duke of Eastmarch that was phrased diplomatically but dripped with barely concealed fury. And one letter with no seal, no signature, just a message in elegant script. The seeds have been planted. The harvest will come soon. Choose wisely what you defend, for you cannot protect everything. He read it 3 times, analyzing the word choice and phrasing. It was a threat, obviously. But from whom? The handwriting was unfamiliar. The paper expensive but generic. No identifying marks. Someone in Viremont Hall had sent this. Someone close enough to slip it into his correspondence without detection. A knock at the door pulled him from his analysis. Enter. Marcus stepped inside, his expression serious for once. "We need to talk. Really talk. No games." Alaric gestured to the chairs by the fireplace. They sat across from each other, 2 brothers who'd spent decades in competition disguised as family. "I've been offered a deal," Marcus said without preamble, "by Lord Vancourt and Lady Cordelia. They want me to publicly call for your removal, claim you're unfit to lead, challenge the succession. And I told them I'd consider it because I wanted to know what you'd say if I told you." Alaric studied his brother's face. Marcus was many things, but he was rarely this direct. "You're testing me," Alaric said. "I'm giving you a chance to be honest. For once in our lives, let's not play the political game. Just 2 brothers having a real conversation." Alaric leaned back in his chair, considering. "Fine. Honest conversation. Do you actually want to be Duke, or do you just want to prove you could be?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Both." "Neither. I don't know. I've spent my whole life being the spare, the backup plan, the one who gets all the education and training but none of the authority. It makes you resentful. I know. Do you? Because from where I sit, you've had everything. Power, authority, respect. You've never had to wonder if you matter, if you're valued for yourself or just as an insurance policy. You think I don't understand what it's like to be trapped in a role you didn't choose?" Alaric asked. "I was 12 years old when Father died." 12. And suddenly I was Duke. Every decision scrutinized. Every mistake amplified. No room for weakness or doubt. "At least you got to make decisions," Marcus countered. "I've spent 20 years watching you rule while I manage estate accounts and attend dinners. Do you know how humiliating that is? So this is about pride. It's about wanting to matter." Marcus's voice was raw now, genuine emotion breaking through. "And yes, maybe it's about pride too. Maybe I'm tired of being the charming brother who everyone likes but no one respects." Alaric felt something unexpected. Sympathy. Because he understood that particular brand of torment. The gap between who you were and who you wanted to be. "If you challenge me, you'll lose," Alaric said quietly. "Not because I'm better than you, but because I've spent 15 years building power structures that won't transfer easily. The military answers to me. The treasury is loyal to me. Even if you got the council to support your claim, you'd be Duke in name only." "I know," Marcus admitted, "which is why I haven't accepted their offer. Yet, what would it take for you to refuse it permanently?" The question hung between them. "Give me something real," Marcus said finally. "Not estate management or ceremonial duties. Actual power. A role that matters." "Like what?" "Make me your second. Your official deputy with authority to make decisions when you're unavailable. Give me command over the southern provinces. Let me be more than decorative." Alaric considered it. It was a risk. Giving Marcus real power meant creating a potential rival with actual resources. But keeping him powerless and resentful meant eventually facing a coup from within. "Done," Alaric said. "You'll be officially named Second of Viremont. You'll have authority over the southern territories and command of the southern garrison. You'll attend all council meetings with full voice. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. Just like that? Just like that. Because you're right. I've been treating you like a threat instead of an asset, and that needs to change if either of us is going to survive what's coming. Marcus stood and extended his hand. Then we have an accord. Alaric took it, the grip firm. But understand this, Alaric added. The moment you betray that trust, the moment you make a move against me, I will destroy you, brother or not. I'd expect nothing less, Marcus said with a hint of his usual smile. After Marcus left, Alaric returned to the window. One threat potentially neutralized, but how many others were still growing in the darkness? He thought about the anonymous note, the warning about choosing what to defend, and he realized with cold certainty that the real attack hadn't started yet. Everything so far had been positioning, testing, probing for weaknesses. The actual assault was still coming, and when it did, it wouldn't target him directly. It would target Alara, because that's what he would do if he wanted to destroy Duke Alaric Viremont, find the thing he cared about most and rip it apart. The attack came 3 days later, not with swords or soldiers, but with something far more devastating. Words. Alaric was in the southern wing reviewing grain shipments when Thomas found him, the steward's face pale and drawn in a way that immediately triggered alarm. My lord, you need to come to the main hall. Now. The urgency in Thomas's voice cut through everything else. Alaric followed without question, his mind already racing through possibilities. An attack? A fire? Injury? What he found was worse than any of those. The main hall of Viremont was filled with people. Not just servants and household staff, but nobles from neighboring estates, members of the merchant guild, minor lords who had no business being in his home without invitation. At least 40 people crowded into the space, their faces ranging from curiosity to barely concealed glee. And at the center of it all stood Lady Cordelia Ashmont, holding a stack of papers like they were weapons forged specifically to destroy him. Ah, Duke Viremont, she said with false sweetness. How timely. We were just discussing matters of considerable importance to your household. Alaric's eyes swept the room, taking inventory. Lord Vancourt stood near the windows, his expression carefully neutral. Lord Bancroft shifted uncomfortably by the fireplace. His brother Marcus was nowhere to be seen, which meant either he'd been excluded or had chosen not to witness this. And Alara. She stood near the far wall, her face completely bloodless, her hands clenched at her sides so tight her knuckles had gone white. Whatever this was, it had already happened. He was walking into the aftermath. What is the meaning of this intrusion? Alaric's voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a blade. This is a private residence. You have no authority to gather here without invitation. Cordelia's smile widened. Actually, under Section 12 of the Noble Conduct Protocols, any member of the Provincial Council may call an emergency gathering if evidence of moral corruption threatens the integrity of a ruling house. I've invoked that right. She held up the papers. And I have considerable evidence. Alaric's mind raced. The Noble Conduct Protocols were ancient, rarely invoked, and designed for extreme circumstances. Invoking them suggested Cordelia had something she believed was genuinely damaging, something beyond rumors or speculation. Then present your evidence and disperse this mob, Alaric said coldly. Mob? Cordelia looked around at the assembled nobles with theatrical surprise. These are witnesses, required by protocol to verify the accuracy of presented evidence. Surely you wouldn't want this to be handled in private, where accusations could be dismissed as hearsay? It was a trap, a carefully constructed legal snare. If he demanded privacy, he'd look like he was hiding something. If he allowed the public spectacle, whatever damage Cordelia planned would be amplified exponentially. Proceed, he said flatly. Cordelia handed the stack of papers to Lord Vancourt, who began distributing copies throughout the room. Alaric watched as the pages passed from hand to hand, watched as expressions shifted from curiosity to shock to something uglier. What you're holding, Cordelia announced, are correspondence records from the past 4 months. Letters between Miss Alara Whitcomb and various merchant houses throughout the realm. Letters detailing strategic information about Viremont's trade agreements, military deployments, and financial vulnerabilities. The words landed like physical blows. Alaric's eyes shot to Alara, who stood frozen, her expression one of complete horror. Those are lies, Alara said, her voice steady despite the tremor underneath. I never wrote those letters. The handwriting has been verified by 3 independent experts, Cordelia continued smoothly, all of whom will testify that these are authentic documents written in Miss Whitcomb's hand. She pulled out another set of papers. Additionally, we have financial records showing substantial payments made to Miss Whitcomb from the Merchants Guild of Eastmarch. Payments that began coincidentally around the same time she entered Duke Viramont's confidence. The implication was crystal clear. Alara was a spy, a plant sent by rival interests to extract information and undermine Viramont from within. Alaric forced his mind into the cold, analytical space where emotion couldn't reach. This was a setup. Had to be. But the question was, how deep did it go? Were the documents forgeries? Or had someone actually written correspondence in Alara's name? "I want to see those letters," Alaric demanded. Vancourt approached and handed him a set. Alaric scanned them quickly, his stomach sinking with each line. The handwriting did look like Alara's. The information contained in them was accurate. Details about recent trade negotiations that only someone close to his inner council would know. But the tone was wrong, the phrasing. Alara wrote with precision and economy. These letters were flowery, elaborate. Someone had studied her handwriting, but not her voice. "These are forgeries," Alaric said firmly. "Skilled ones, but forgeries nonetheless." "Your bias is understandable," Cordelia said with false sympathy. "A man in love rarely sees clearly, but the evidence is conclusive. Miss Whitcomb has been selling Viramont's secrets to your enemies." She turned to address the room. "This is what happens when proper protocols are abandoned. When a duke elevates an outsider without proper vetting. When desire overrides judgment. The merchant class has infiltrated one of our greatest houses and nearly succeeded in destroying it from within." The crowd murmured agreement. Alaric could feel the mood shifting, turning against him and Alara both. This wasn't just about destroying her reputation, it was about proving he was unfit to lead, that his judgment was compromised, that everything the council had warned about was true. Alara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "I have never betrayed Duke Viramont's trust. I have never sold information to anyone. These documents are fabrications designed to remove me from court and discredit the Duke." "Then explain the payments," Lord Bancroft demanded, his voice shaking with righteous anger. "We have bank records showing gold transferred to accounts in your name." "Those accounts were opened without my knowledge or consent," Alara shot back. "Someone is framing me." "How convenient," Cordelia purred. "The evidence piles up, but you claim innocence. You claim conspiracy. You expect us to believe that multiple independent sources have all fabricated evidence against you?" "I expect you to use basic logic," Alara said, her composure cracking slightly. "Why would I document my own espionage? If I were actually selling secrets, I certainly wouldn't leave a paper trail." "Unless you believed yourself untouchable," Vancourt interjected, "protected by the Duke's affection. Perhaps you grew careless." Alaric's mind worked through the angles. This was sophisticated. Too sophisticated to be a spontaneous attack. Someone had been planning this for weeks, possibly months. Creating false documentation. Establishing fake financial trails. Building a case piece by piece. And the timing was perfect. Right when he'd publicly committed to defending Alara. Right when his relationship with the council was most strained. This attack accomplished multiple goals simultaneously. It removed Alara from court, proved the council was right to be concerned, and demonstrated Alaric's judgment was fatally compromised. It was brilliant, cruel and ruthless, but brilliant. The question was who had orchestrated it. Cordelia was the public face, but she lacked the strategic depth for something this complex. Vancourt had the intelligence, but not the connections to forge banking records. Bancroft was too straightforward for this level of deception, which meant someone else was pulling the strings. Someone who understood both the political landscape and how to manufacture evidence. Someone close enough to know exactly which pressure points to hit. "Duke Viramont," Cordelia said formally, "under the authority granted by the Noble Conduct Protocols, I am demanding that Miss Alara Whitcomb be removed from Viramont Hall immediately and placed under house arrest pending a full investigation." "You have no such authority," Alaric said coldly. "Actually, she does," Lord Tremaine said quietly. He'd been standing in the back, silent until now. "The protocols are clear. When evidence of espionage or treason is presented, the accused must be isolated until investigation is complete." The old lord looked genuinely pained. "I take no pleasure in this, Alaric, but the law is the law." Alaric felt the walls closing in. If he refused to comply with the protocols, he'd be violating centuries of noble law. It would give his enemies legal grounds to petition the king for his removal. But if he allowed Alara to be arrested, he'd be abandoning her to face this false accusation alone. Every instinct screamed to reject the entire proceeding, to throw these people out of his house and dare them to return. But that was emotion talking, anger and protective fury that would only make things worse. He needed to think like a strategist, not like a man watching someone he cared about being destroyed. "I will agree to a formal investigation," Alaric said carefully, "conducted by neutral parties, not by accusers with obvious bias. Miss Whitcomb will remain at Veermont Hall during this investigation, with access to legal counsel and the ability to mount a defense." "That's unacceptable," Cordelia snapped. "She could destroy evidence. Flee in the night." "Flee she in. She has nowhere to flee to," Alaric countered. "And if your evidence is as conclusive as you claim, no amount of destruction would help her. Unless you're concerned that closer examination might reveal the truth about these fabrications." The barb landed. Cordelia's face tightened. "Fine," she said after a moment. "House arrest at Veermont, under guard. She is not to have private meetings with anyone, including you, without witnesses present. All correspondence monitored. Any attempt to leave the grounds will be considered admission of guilt." It was a compromise that satisfied no one, which meant it was probably the best option available. "Agreed," Alaric said. "Now remove yourselves from my home. The investigation can begin tomorrow with properly appointed examiners." The crowd began to disperse, though slowly, people lingering to whisper and speculate. Alaric caught Alara's eyes across the room. She looked shattered. Not broken, but cracked in ways that would take time to heal. He wanted to go to her, to offer reassurance. But Cordelia's terms meant any interaction would be witnessed and interpreted as evidence of conspiracy. So he remained still as guards approached Alara to escort her to her chambers. Remained impassive as she walked past him without a word. Remained cold and controlled as the last nobles filed out, their expressions ranging from sympathy to satisfaction. Only when the hall was empty did he allow himself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. Thomas approached quietly. "My lord, what are your orders? Find out who actually orchestrated this." "Not Cordelia. She's too obvious. Someone else is behind it. Someone with access to detailed information about Veermont's finances and Alara's daily routine." Thomas nodded. "I'll begin immediately." "But sir, you should know. The servants are already talking. Many of them believe the accusations." "Of course they do," Alaric said bitterly. "A compelling lie spreads faster than a complicated truth." He walked to the window and stared out at the grounds. Somewhere in this estate, possibly in this very building, was the person who'd crafted this attack, who'd spent weeks or months preparing the perfect trap, and he had no idea who it was. The afternoon dissolved into a nightmare of procedural bureaucracy. Lord Tremaine arrived with 2 magistrates from the capital, neutral parties who would examine the evidence and conduct interviews. They were polite, professional, and utterly unmoved by Alaric's protests about the document's authenticity. "We must examine all evidence with equal weight," the senior magistrate explained. "Your belief in Miss Whitcomb's innocence is noted, but it cannot override documented proof." "The documented proof is manufactured," Alaric insisted. "That will be determined through investigation. Until then, we ask for your cooperation and patience." Patience. As if watching someone he cared about being systematically destroyed was something he could be patient about. But losing his temper wouldn't help. So he provided the magistrates with access to financial records, correspondence logs, anything they requested. He answered their questions with controlled precision. He played the role of cooperative duke while his mind worked through strategies to dismantle this attack. Evening came. Alaric stood in his study, staring at the copies of the forged letters. Whoever had created these had studied Alara carefully. The handwriting was nearly perfect. Only someone intimately familiar with her writing would spot the subtle differences in letter formation and spacing, which meant the forger had access to authentic samples. Letters Alara had written, possibly to Alaric himself or to other members of the household. A knock at the door. Marcus entered without waiting for permission, his face grim. "This is bad," he said without preamble. "The story is already spreading beyond Veermont. By tomorrow, every noble house within 100 miles will know that Alara Whitcomb was exposed as a spy." "I know." Marcus poured himself whiskey and dropped into a chair. "I tried to find out who initiated this. Called in every favor I had, and I got nothing. Whoever planned this covered their tracks completely. It has to be someone with resources, Alaric said, thinking aloud. Someone who could forge banking records and bribe handwriting experts. That requires both money and connections. It also requires detailed knowledge of your household, Marcus added. The letters reference conversations and events that weren't public. Someone close was feeding information to the orchestrator, a spy within a fabricated spy accusation. The irony was almost artistic. What about Van Court? Alaric asked. He has the intelligence and ambition. Marcus shook his head. I thought so too, but I've been watching him. He's surprised by all this. Playing along because it serves his interests, but he didn't create it. Then who? That's what I can't figure out. Cordelia is too impulsive, Bancroft too straightforward, Tremaine too honorable, and none of the minor lords have the resources to pull this off. They sat in silence for a moment. Two brothers who'd spent decades as rivals, now working as reluctant allies. There's something else, Marcus said quietly. The servants are turning on her. I've heard whispers about accidents, contaminated food, a fall down the stairs. Nothing direct, but the implication is clear. People willing to hurt her to prove their loyalty to me, Alaric said bitterly, or to demonstrate they never trusted her in the first place. Either way, she's not safe here, even under guard. I can't send her away. That would look like admission of guilt. Then you're in an impossible position. Keep her here and risk her safety. Send her away and confirm every accusation. Alaric stood and walked to the window. The grounds of Viramont stretched into darkness, every shadow potentially hiding an enemy. There's a third option, he said slowly, which is, we prove she's innocent by finding the real architect of this plot and exposing them publicly. And if we can't, then we lose everything. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You really care about her, don't you? This isn't just political anymore. Alaric didn't answer immediately, because the truth was complicated. Did he care about Alara? Yes. But was it love or recognition, affection or respect? He wasn't sure he knew the difference anymore. I care about the fact that she's being destroyed for the crime of being associated with me, he said finally. I care that everything she accused me of, using her as a symbol, making her a target, has come true. And I care that if I can't protect her, then every claim about my compromised judgment becomes true. So this is about redemption. This is about not being the kind of man who abandons people when protecting them becomes difficult. A sharp knock interrupted them. Thomas entered, his expression urgent. My lord, you need to see this. He handed Alaric a single sheet of paper. It was a letter, sealed with the royal crest of King Edward III. Alaric broke the seal and read quickly. With each line, his jaw tightened. What is it? Marcus asked. A formal inquiry from the king. He's heard about the situation and is requesting a full report. He's also suggesting that for the good of the realm's stability, I consider removing myself from direct governance until the matter is resolved. That's not a suggestion, Marcus said grimly. That's a polite order. I know. And if you refuse, then he has grounds to declare me in contempt and strip my title entirely. The trap was complete now. Orchestrated not just at the provincial level, but escalated to involve the crown itself. Whoever had planned this had connections that reached into the royal court. This isn't just about removing Alara, Alaric said slowly. This is about removing me. She's just the weapon they're using. Finally, you're seeing clearly, Marcus said. This was never about her specifically. It's about proving you're unfit, that you let emotion override duty, that you're exactly the kind of liability the realm can't afford. Then we need to prove otherwise. How? You've already declared your support for her publicly, already rejected proper alliances, already threatened your own council. Every action you've taken has reinforced their narrative. Alaric stared at the letter from the king, his mind working through scenarios and strategies. Every option led to loss. Accept the king's suggestion and abandon his authority. Refuse and face royal intervention. Continue defending Alara and watch the evidence mount against them both. There was only one path forward, the one he'd been avoiding because it required admitting something he didn't want to acknowledge. He'd lost control of the situation, completely. His authority, his strategies, his carefully maintained dominance, none of it mattered anymore. He was reacting instead of dictating, being moved instead of moving others. And that meant he needed to change tactics entirely. Stop fighting like a duke and start fighting like someone with nothing left to lose. I need to see Alara, he said. That's forbidden under the house arrest terms, Thomas reminded him. I don't care. Get her to the East Tower, tonight. Make sure no one sees. Thomas hesitated, then nodded and left. This is a mistake, Marcus said. If you're caught meeting her in secret, it will be seen as proof of conspiracy. Then we'd better not get caught. 2 hours later, Alaric stood in the East Tower's upper room, a space rarely used and far from the main household traffic. Alara entered silently, her guard bribed to look the other way. She looked exhausted. The confident woman who'd challenged his tariff structure 6 months ago had been replaced by someone hollowed out by sustained attack. They sat across from each other in the dim lamplight. I'm sorry, Alaric said. It was inadequate, but true. For what specifically? Alara asked. For making me a target? For bringing me into your world? For not protecting me better? You'll need to be more specific because the list is extensive. All of it. She laughed bitterly. At least you're honest. They sat in silence for a moment. I didn't write those letters, Alara said quietly. I didn't take payment from anyone. I didn't betray you. I know. Do you? Or do you just want to believe it? I know, Alaric repeated firmly, because I've read those letters carefully. The content is accurate, but the voice is wrong. You don't write like that. Someone studied your handwriting, but not your actual communication style. Alara's shoulders sagged slightly, relief visible. Thank you for seeing that. But it doesn't matter what I see, Alaric continued. The magistrates will examine handwriting, not voice. They'll see authentic-looking documents and verified financial records. They'll conclude you're guilty because the evidence, however fabricated, is convincing. So I'm condemned regardless. Not yet, but we're running out of time and options. Then what's your plan? Alaric leaned forward, his expression intense. We find who actually did this. We expose them. And we do it before the king's inquiry forces me to step down. And how do we accomplish that in, 3 days? I don't know yet. The honesty hung between them. You're not going to sacrifice me to save yourself, Alara said. It wasn't a question. No. Even though it would be the smart political move? Denounce me. Claim I deceived you, restore your standing with the council? Even then. Why? We're not in love. We barely know each other. You owe me nothing. Alaric was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because if I abandon you now, I become exactly what they've always said I am. A tyrant who uses people and discards them when convenient. And I'm trying very hard to be something different. That's not a good enough reason to destroy yourself. It's the only reason that matters. Alara stood and walked to the narrow window overlooking the darkened grounds. I've been thinking about who could have done this, she said. It requires someone with detailed knowledge of both your household and mine. Someone who knows my daily routine, my handwriting, my connections. Someone with access to banking systems and enough credibility to bribe officials. That describes a lot of people. No, she said, turning to face him. It really doesn't. Most of the nobles who hate me don't know me well enough. They've never bothered to study me because I'm beneath their notice. But someone has been watching me very carefully for months. Alaric felt something cold settle in his gut. Who? Alara met his eyes. Someone in your immediate household. Someone who sees me every day. Someone who has access to your private correspondence and mine. The implication was clear. The traitor was close. Possibly someone Alaric trusted implicitly. Thomas has been with me for 30 years, Alaric said. I'd stake my life on his loyalty. I'm not accusing Thomas. But what about the rest of your staff? Your advisors? Your family? Marcus is helping investigate. Is he? Or is he positioning himself to take over when you fall? The question struck like a knife, because Alaric had asked himself the same thing. His brother's sudden cooperation, his assistance with the investigation. Was it genuine alliance or strategic maneuvering? I don't know, Alaric admitted. I don't know who to trust anymore. Then we trust no one, Alara said firmly. We investigate this ourselves. No intermediaries, no delegation. That's impossible. I'm Duke. I can't disappear to conduct secret investigations. Then you need to decide what's more important. Maintaining appearances or finding the truth. It was the same choice he'd been facing for months, expressed in different terms. Perform the role or be himself. Maintain control or embrace chaos. Protect power or pursue justice. And for the first time in his life, Alaric Viramont chose the latter. We have 3 days, he said, before the king's men arrive and this situation escalates beyond my ability to control. 3 days to find evidence, identify the real orchestrator, and expose them publicly enough that the accusations against you collapse. And if we fail, then we both lose everything. You'll be exiled or imprisoned. I'll be stripped of my title. And whoever did this will have won completely. Alara walked back to where he sat and extended her hand. Then we'd better not fail. He took it, the grip firm and equal. Partners, he said. Partners, she agreed. They spent the next hour planning in urgent whispers. Alara would use her confinement to interview servants, extracting information under the guise of defending herself. Alaric would review financial records personally, looking for irregularities that might reveal the source of the fabricated accounts. It wasn't much, but it was something. As Alara prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Alaric, when this is over, assuming we survive, things can't go back to the way they were. I know. I mean it. No more grand gestures. No more using me as your symbol of rebellion. If we make it through this, we need to actually figure out what we are to each other. Not what we represent. Who we actually are. He nodded slowly. Agreed. She left silently, escorted back to her guarded chambers by a route that avoided detection. Alaric remained in the tower room, staring at nothing. 3 days to solve an impossible puzzle. 3 days to expose an enemy skilled enough to frame someone perfectly. 3 days before everything he'd built came crashing down. And the worst part, the truly devastating realization, was that he'd brought this on himself. Not through incompetence or bad judgment, but through the simple act of caring about something beyond power. In the world he'd been raised in, that was the greatest weakness of all. Attachment made you vulnerable. Love made you blind. Caring made you soft. And now he was paying the price for all three. But as he walked back through the dark corridors of Viermont Hall, past rooms filled with people who might be allies or enemies, past windows overlooking lands he might lose, past portraits of ancestors who'd built this legacy through ruthlessness and calculation, Alaric felt something unexpected. Relief. Because for 33 years he'd played the role perfectly. The brutal duke, the strategic genius, the man without weakness or doubt. And he was exhausted. Whatever happened in the next 3 days, at least he'd finally be fighting for something real. Something that mattered beyond maintaining power for power's sake. That had to count for something, even if it cost him everything. The first break came at dawn on the second day. Alaric had spent the night in the estate archives, a cramped stone room beneath the main hall where financial records dating back generations were stored in endless rows of leather-bound ledgers. His eyes burned from reading by lamplight. His back ached from hunching over century-old accounting systems. But he'd found something, a pattern. 3 months ago, a series of small payments had been made from Viermont accounts to a merchant broker in the capital. Nothing unusual on the surface. The estate regularly purchased goods through intermediaries, but these particular payments were structured oddly, split across multiple dates, routed through different departmental budgets, almost as if someone was trying to hide the full amount. Alaric had cross-referenced the dates with other records and found something that made his blood run cold. Every payment coincided with days when Alara had written correspondence, letters to her father about his health, notes to suppliers about textile orders for the household. Routine communication that any resident of Viermont Hall might conduct. Someone had been tracking her writing, collecting samples, and paying a broker to forge documents using those samples. The question was who had authorized the payments. The signatures on the requisition forms were illegible scrawls, deliberately obscured, but the departmental codes revealed something. These payments had come from household operations. Not military, not agricultural. Household. Which meant someone in the direct management of Viermont Hall had orchestrated this. Alaric gathered the ledgers and climbed the stone stairs back to the main level. Dawn light was breaking through the windows, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. The household was beginning to stir. Servants moving through corridors, kitchen staff preparing breakfast. The daily machinery of aristocratic life grinding forward regardless of crisis. He found Thomas in the butler's pantry, reviewing the day's schedule. I need every household requisition form from the past 6 months, Alaric said without preamble. And I need the original signatures, not copies. Thomas looked up sharply. My lord, that's thousands of documents. Then we'd better start now. 2 hours later, they sat surrounded by stacks of paperwork in Alaric's private study. Thomas had recruited 2 trusted clerks to help sort, but Alaric was examining each signature personally, looking for handwriting that matched the obscured scrawls on the payments to the broker. It was mind-numbing work, the kind of tedious detail that dukes typically delegated. But Alaric had learned that the devil lived in exactly these details. Power wasn't maintained through grand gestures, but through attention to the small mechanisms that made everything function. And someone had used those mechanisms against him. 3 hours in, one of the clerks made a small sound of recognition. "My lord, I think I found something." Alaric took the document. It was a standard supply requisition from 2 months ago. Wine for the guest cellars, signed by the household steward. But the signature, when compared to the obscured ones on the broker payments, matched perfectly. Same distinctive loop on the capital letter. Same slight tremor on the downstrokes. The household steward was a woman named Catherine Frost. She'd been with Viramont for 12 years. Competent, efficient, completely unremarkable. Alaric had probably spoken to her directly, maybe 5 times in the entire period of her employment. Why would she orchestrate this? What possible motive could a household steward have for framing Alara and undermining his rule? Unless she was working for someone else. "Find Catherine Frost," Alaric ordered. "Bring her here, now." Thomas left quickly. The clerks were dismissed. Alaric sat alone with the evidence, his mind racing through implications. If Catherine was the operational hand, who was the strategic mind? Who had recruited her? What had they offered in return for her cooperation? 15 minutes later, Thomas returned. His face was grim. "She's gone, my lord. Her quarters are empty, cleared out completely. The staff says she left before dawn, said she'd received news of a family emergency." Alaric stood so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "How long ago?" "Maybe 2 hours." She took a horse from the stables, headed east toward the main road. East. Toward the capital. Toward whoever had been pulling her strings. Alaric's mind shifted into combat mode, the same cold clarity that had served him in political battles and actual warfare. Catherine was running because she knew the investigation was closing in, which meant whoever had hired her also knew, which meant they were already preparing their next move. He had maybe hours before the entire scheme collapsed or escalated, before whoever was behind this either disappeared or struck again. "Get Marcus," Alaric commanded, "and have 6 riders prepared. We're going after her." "My lord," Thomas said carefully, "if you leave Viramont now, the magistrates will see it as abandonment of the investigation. The king's men arrive tomorrow. You need to be here. Then the king's men will have to wait. This is a mistake." "Probably," Alaric agreed, "but it's my mistake to make." He strode from the study toward his chambers, already planning. He'd need riding clothes, weapons, a small force that could move fast. Catherine had a 2-hour head start, but she was alone and wouldn't be expecting pursuit. Marcus met him in the corridor, already dressed for riding. "I heard," his brother said. "I'm coming with you. You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Marcus's expression was serious. "Whatever our differences, you're my brother, and someone is attacking our house. That makes it my fight too." There was something in Marcus's voice that made Alaric pause. Real conviction. Not political maneuvering or strategic positioning, genuine anger at the violation of their family. Maybe he'd been wrong about his brother. Maybe the alliance they'd formed wasn't just temporary convenience, but something more substantial. "Thank you," Alaric said simply. They gathered in the courtyard 20 minutes later. 6 mounted riders plus Alaric and Marcus. All armed, all loyal. Men who'd served Viramont for years and had no love for conspiracies that threatened their home. As they prepared to ride out, Alara appeared at the main entrance, flanked by her guards. "You're going after the steward," she called down. "Yes." "Take me with you." "Absolutely not. You're under house arrest. If you leave, it confirms every accusation." "I don't care," Alara said fiercely. "This is my life being destroyed. I have a right to face whoever did this." Alaric looked at her standing there in the early morning light, her jaw set with determination. Everything he'd tried to protect her from had happened anyway. Every caution he'd taken had been insufficient. Maybe she was right. Maybe she deserved to be part of this final confrontation. But if he took her, he'd be violating the terms of her confinement, giving the magistrates and the council exactly the evidence they needed to condemn them both. It was a choice between pragmatism and principle, between protecting her legally and respecting her agency. He made the decision in seconds. "Get a horse," he said. Her guards moved to stop her, but Alaric's look froze them in place. Anyone who prevents her leaves my service immediately. The guard stepped back. Alara disappeared and returned 5 minutes later in riding clothes, moving with the quick efficiency of someone who'd made similar escapes before. She swung onto a horse with practiced ease. The 8 of them rode out of Veermont Hall just as the sun fully cleared the horizon. Behind them, Alaric could hear shouting, the magistrates discovering his departure, the council members rushing to understand what was happening. But he didn't look back, because sometimes the only way to win was to stop playing by rules designed to ensure your defeat. They rode hard for 3 hours, following the eastern road toward the capital. Marcus had sent scouts ahead who reported back that a woman matching Catherine's description had stopped at a coaching inn 15 miles ahead. She was waiting for the midday coach, apparently believing she had time before anyone noticed her absence. She was wrong. They reached the inn just before noon. It was a small establishment that catered to travelers between provinces. Modest but clean, the kind of place where people minded their own business. Alaric dismounted and handed his reins to one of the riders. Marcus, take 3 men and cover the back exits. No one leaves this building until I have answers. His brother nodded and moved quickly. Alaric entered the inn with Alara beside him and 2 guards behind. The common room was half full, travelers eating simple meals, a few locals drinking ale. And in the corner, seated alone at a small table, was Catherine Frost. She looked up as they entered. Her face went white. For a moment, no one moved. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as Duke Alaric Veermont walked deliberately toward the household steward who'd tried to destroy him. Catherine stood slowly, her hand moving toward something beneath her cloak. I wouldn't, Alaric said quietly. The guards behind him had hands on their sword hilts. She froze. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, Catherine said. Her voice was steady despite her fear. I thought I had more time. Who hired you? Alaric demanded. Catherine laughed bitterly. Does it matter? You've already lost. Even if you drag me back to Veermont, the damage is done. The king's men arrive tomorrow. Your reputation is shattered. The council has turned on you. Taking me won't change any of that. It will give me the truth. And right now, that's worth more than reputation. The truth? Catherine's expression twisted. You want the truth? Fine. You were always going to fall, Alaric. You just made it easier by caring about something besides power. She gestured toward Alara. That was your mistake. Letting someone matter, showing weakness. The moment you chose her over proper alliances, you painted a target on your own back. I asked, who hired you? Alaric repeated. Not for a lecture on my failures. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her cloak slowly and pulled out a sealed letter. Tossed it on the table. My instructions, my payment schedule, everything you need to know. Alaric picked up the letter and broke the seal. Read quickly, and felt the world shift beneath him. The handwriting was familiar. The signature unmistakable. It was Thomas Blackwell, his steward, the man he'd trusted for 30 years. No, Alaric said flatly. This is another forgery. Read the details, Catherine said. The private information only Thomas would know. The access codes to your personal accounts. The daily schedules. It's all there. Alaric read again, more carefully, and this time he saw what he'd missed initially. Information so specific, so precise, that only someone with intimate knowledge of his household could have provided it. But Thomas had been helping him investigate, had been loyal and competent for decades, had served his father before him. Why would he betray that now? Unless his loyalty had never been to Alaric personally, unless it had been to something else. Where is Thomas now? Alara asked quietly. She'd been reading over Alaric's shoulder. At Veermont? Catherine said, waiting to see if his plan succeeds. And if I'm caught, he has plausible deniability. After all, I'm just a household steward who went rogue. He's the loyal servant who helped investigate the conspiracy. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Thomas could claim he'd been manipulated or deceived, could position himself as another victim. And with Catherine as the convenient scapegoat, the investigation would conclude without ever touching him. Why did he do it? Alaric asked. Catherine shrugged. You'd have to ask him. But if I had to guess, it's because you were changing things, upsetting the old order. Thomas served your father and your grandfather before that. He believes in the traditional ways, the proper hierarchies, and you were destroying all of that for a woman who didn't belong. So this was about preserving tradition, about punishing Alaric for daring to evolve beyond the brutal efficiency his family was known for. It was about a servant so devoted to the past that he'd betray the present to protect it. Marcus entered through the back door, confirming the building was secure. "We have a problem," Alaric said. He showed his brother the letter. Marcus read it and cursed. Thomas. Of course. He was the only one in position to coordinate everything. The only one with access to detailed information about both household operations and your personal affairs. "We need to go back," Alaric said urgently, "before he realizes we know, before he can destroy evidence or disappear." Alaric nodded. They had maybe hours, maybe less. "Bind her," he ordered, gesturing to Catherine. "She's coming with us. She's our proof." The guards moved to comply. Catherine didn't resist. She looked almost relieved to have the burden of conspiracy lifted from her shoulders. They rode back toward Viermont at a punishing pace, horses lathered with sweat, riders grimacing against the strain. But no one complained. Everyone understood what was at stake. By the time they reached Viermont Hall, the sun was setting in streaks of red and gold. The courtyard was filled with activity. Servants rushing about, guards positioned at every entrance. And standing on the main steps, looking calm and competent as always, was Thomas Blackwell. He saw them approaching and something flickered across his face. Not quite surprise, more like resignation. "My lord," Thomas called out. "Thank goodness you've returned. The magistrates have been asking for you. The king's representatives arrived early. The situation is quite urgent." "I'm sure it is," Alaric said, dismounting. He kept his voice level, casual, because Thomas didn't know yet that they'd found Catherine, didn't know his conspiracy had been exposed, and Alaric wanted to see his face when he learned the truth. The confrontation that followed would become legendary in the history of Viermont, the kind of story servants would tell their grandchildren. The night Duke Alaric Viermont faced the man who'd served his family for 3 decades and demanded answers. They gathered in the Grand Council chamber, the same room where this had all begun with Alaric defending Alara before the noble council. Now it would end with him confronting the true architect of her destruction. Thomas stood in the center of the room, still maintaining his careful composure, but his eyes tracked Catherine with desperate intensity. The magistrates were present, the king's representatives, members of the council, Marcus and Alara. Everyone who mattered was there to witness this final revelation. Alaric stood before Thomas with the letter in his hand. 30 years, he said quietly. 3 decades of loyal service. And this is how it ends. My lord, I don't understand. Don't you? Alaric held up the letter. This is your handwriting, Thomas, your seal, your instructions to Catherine Frost on exactly how to forge documents, create false financial records, and frame Alara Whitcomb for espionage. The room erupted in shocked murmuring. Thomas's face remained carefully neutral, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. That's a forgery, he said. Another attempt to deflect blame. Is it? Alaric pulled out the requisition forms they'd found, the ones with matching signatures, the payment records to the broker, the detailed timeline that only someone in Thomas's position could have created. He laid them all on the table methodically, building the case piece by piece, document by document, and with each addition, Thomas's composure cracked a little more. This is all circumstantial, Thomas tried. Someone could have stolen my seal, forged my handwriting. Catherine Frost has confessed, Alara said coldly. She's provided detailed testimony about how you recruited her, how you paid her, how you coached her on every aspect of the conspiracy. Thomas's eyes snapped to Catherine with pure hatred. You told them everything. I told them the truth, Catherine replied. I'm done being your weapon. Thomas was silent for a long moment. Then something changed in his expression. The careful servant mask fell away completely. What remained was colder, harder. A man who'd spent decades hiding his true thoughts. Fine, he said. Yes, I orchestrated it. Every piece, the forged letters, the false financial records, the anonymous tip to Lady Cordelia, all of it. The room went completely still. Why? Alaric asked. The word came out raw. Because beneath the anger and betrayal was genuine pain. This man had been more than a servant, had been advisor, confidant, the closest thing to family after his father died. Because you were destroying everything, Thomas said, his voice rising. Everything your father built, everything your grandfather fought for, the traditions, the hierarchies, the proper order of things. You were tearing it all down for a merchant's daughter who has no business in our world. He pointed at Alara with trembling fury. She corrupted you, made you weak, made you question systems that have worked for centuries. And I watched you throw away alliances, reject proper marriages, threaten your own counsel, all for what? For her? His voice cracked. I served your father when he was dying, held his hand as he made me promise to protect this house, to preserve the Viramont legacy. And you were destroying it. So yes, I tried to remove the corruption at its source. I tried to save you from yourself. The words hung in the air like smoke. And Alaric understood finally. This wasn't about malice or ambition. It was about a man so devoted to the past that he couldn't see the present, so loyal to tradition that he'd betray the person he'd sworn to serve. You loved my father more than you've ever respected me, Alaric said quietly. I respected you when you acted like a Viramont, Thomas shot back, when you were ruthless and calculating and strong, before she made you soft. I'm not soft, Alaric said. I've just stopped confusing cruelty with strength. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Thomas said bitterly. Philosophy, sentiment, weakness dressed up as evolution. Your father would be ashamed. My father, Alaric said coldly, was a drunk who beat his servants and died choking on his own vomit. If that's the legacy you think I should preserve, you understand nothing about what I'm trying to build. The words struck Thomas like physical blows. His face went red. How dare you? Your father was a great man. My father was a tyrant who ruled through fear and died alone because no one actually loved him. And I refused to become him. Alaric stepped closer. You say you wanted to protect the Viramont legacy, but what you actually wanted was to keep everything frozen in amber, to prevent any change or growth because change terrifies you. Well, I'm done living in my father's shadow. I'm done ruling the way you think I should, and I'm done with you. He turned to the king's representatives. Thomas Blackwell is guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and treason against the Duke of Viramont. I'm requesting he be taken into custody immediately and tried under royal law. The representatives nodded. Guards moved forward. Thomas didn't resist, but as they placed him in chains, he looked at Alaric with something like pity. You think this changes anything? You think exposing me saves you? The council still hates her. The king still questions your judgment. You've won this battle, but you're losing the war. Maybe, Alaric acknowledged, but at least I'm fighting for something real instead of a ghost. Thomas was led away. Catherine followed. The conspirators removed from Viramont Hall like the poison they were. The magistrates conferred briefly with the king's representatives, then approached Alaric. In light of this evidence, the senior magistrate said formally, all charges against Miss Alara Whitcomb are dismissed. The investigation is concluded. Our apologies for the distress this matter has caused. They left quickly, eager to distance themselves from the embarrassment. The council members who'd gathered to witness the confrontation stood in uncomfortable silence. Lord Vancourt finally stepped forward. This doesn't resolve everything, he said carefully. You've proven Miss Whitcomb innocent, but the underlying issues remain. The concerns about your judgment, the rejection of traditional alliances, the changes you're forcing on us. I know, Alaric said, which is why we're going to address those concerns directly. Tomorrow, full council assembly. No more whispers or conspiracies. We're going to have an honest conversation about the future of this province. And if we can't reach consensus, Lord Bancroft asked, then we'll know where we stand, Alaric replied, and everyone can make their choices accordingly. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a path forward, a way to move past the immediate crisis into whatever came next. The nobles filed out slowly. Some looked relieved, others troubled, all uncertain. When the chamber finally emptied, only Alaric, Alara, and Marcus remained. Well, Marcus said, that was dramatic. That's one word for it, Alaric replied. He felt exhausted, not just physically, but spiritually. The kind of bone-deep weariness that came from sustained crisis. Alara approached him slowly. Thank you, she said, for believing me, for fighting for the truth even when it cost you. You were right from the beginning, Alaric said. I made you a target. Everything Thomas said about that was true, but you also protected me, stood by me when everyone else was ready to throw me away. That counts for something, does it? Because I'm not sure I did this for noble reasons. Maybe I just needed to prove I was different from my father, that I could care about something besides power. Maybe it was both, Alara said. People are complicated. Motives are messy. That doesn't make the actions less valuable. Marcus cleared his throat. I hate to interrupt this moment of mutual appreciation, but we have a serious problem. The king's representatives didn't leave because the investigation concluded. They left because they need to report to the crown. And their report is going to say that Duke Viramont's household was infiltrated by a conspiracy that nearly succeeded. He's right, Alaric acknowledged. We've exposed Thomas and cleared Alara, but we look weak, vulnerable, like our house is compromised. So what do we do? Alara asked. We get ahead of it, Alaric said, his strategic mind engaging fully. We don't wait for the king to decide our fate. We take the offensive. Meaning tomorrow. At the council assembly, we don't just defend our position. We propose reforms, changes to how noble houses operate, new structures that make this kind of internal conspiracy harder to execute. You're doubling down, Marcus said with something like admiration. Instead of retreating, you're pushing forward. It's the only move that makes sense. If we appear weak, we'll be destroyed piece by piece. But if we appear strong and confident enough to lead reform, we might actually survive this. That's insane, Alara said. Probably, Alaric agreed. But everything else we've tried has been inadequate. So maybe insanity is what's required. They stood in the empty council chamber, 3 people who'd been forced into alliance by crisis, and were now committed to seeing it through. Get some rest, Alaric said. Tomorrow is going to be brutal. Marcus left first. Alara lingered. Are we going to talk about what happens after? She asked. After the council meeting. After the immediate crisis passes. What do you want to happen? Alaric considered this question carefully. Honestly, I don't know. I know I care about you. I know I'm not willing to sacrifice you for political convenience. But beyond that, everything is uncertain. That's fair, Alara said, because I don't know either. What I do know is that we work well together, as partners, as equals. And maybe that's enough for now. Maybe it is. She turned to leave, then paused. Thank you for letting me be part of the hunt today, for including me instead of protecting me from it. You deserve to face your accuser. More than that, you treated me like an equal, like someone capable of handling the truth. That matters more than you know. She left, and Alaric was alone in the council chamber where so much had been decided and destroyed. Tomorrow would bring new battles. The council would resist his reforms. The king might intervene. Other noble houses would sense weakness and strike. But tonight, he'd won something important. Not just vindication for Alara, but clarity about who he was and what he valued. Power wasn't the point. It was the tool, the means to an end. And the end he was fighting for now was something his father had never understood. Something Thomas had been too blinded by tradition to see. The chance to build something better. Not perfect. Not utopian, just better than the cruel efficiency that had defined Viramont for generations. Whether he'd succeed was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, Alaric Viramont knew exactly what he was fighting for, and he was prepared to risk everything to achieve it. The council chamber fell silent. Outside, night deepened over Viramont Hall. Guards changed shifts, servants extinguished lamps. The great house settled into uneasy sleep. But in the morning, everything would change. Because Duke Alaric Viramont was done playing defense. It was time to reshape the realm, or burn it down trying. The morning of the council assembly broke cold and clear. Winter was settling over Viramont in earnest now, frost turning the estate grounds into something crystalline and merciless. The kind of weather that killed anything not strong enough to endure. Alaric stood at his chamber window watching the nobles arrive. They came in carriages bearing family crests that dated back centuries. Men and women who'd inherited power the same way they'd inherited eye color and bone structure. Who believed their right to rule was written into the fabric of the universe itself. And he was about to tell them they were wrong. The enormity of what he was attempting settled over him like physical weight. This wasn't just about defending Alara anymore. It wasn't about clearing his name or restoring his reputation. This was about fundamentally challenging the system that had created him. The aristocratic machinery that turned human beings into titles and reduced love to political calculation. His father would have called it suicide. Thomas would have called it treason. Most of the people gathering in the council chamber below would call it madness. Maybe they were all right. But Alaric had learned something in the past weeks. Something his years of brutal efficiency had never taught him. That there were things worth destroying yourself for. Principles that mattered more than preservation. And that real strength wasn't about maintaining control, but about having the courage to let go of it when necessary. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Enter. Marcus stepped inside, already dressed in formal council attire. His expression was serious, but not grim. They're all here, every major house in the province, some minor ones too. Word spread fast about Thomas. Everyone wants to see what you'll do next. Good. Then they'll get exactly what they came for. Marcus walked to the window and stood beside his brother, both of them looking out at the assembled power of their world. You know this might not work, Marcus said quietly. You're asking people to voluntarily give up advantages they've held for generations, to accept changes that threaten their entire way of life. That's not something people do willingly, I know, but I have to try. Because if we don't change voluntarily, the change will be forced on us eventually, and that will be far more brutal. Marcus was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I think you're right. The world is shifting. Merchant wealth is rising. Education is spreading. The old certainties are crumbling. We can either evolve with it or be crushed by it. He turned to face Alaric directly. I'm with you. Whatever you propose today, you'll have my support. Not because you're my brother, but because I actually believe in what you're trying to build. The words struck deeper than Alaric expected. Because Marcus had spent his entire life in opposition, had been the rival, the competitor, the brother waiting for any opportunity to claim power. And now he was offering genuine alliance. Thank you, Alaric said simply. Don't thank me yet. We might both be stripped of our titles by sunset, then we'll be stripped together. They walked to the council chamber side by side. Brothers united not by blood or duty, but by shared conviction. It was a strange feeling. Alaric had spent so long fighting alone that having an ally felt almost foreign. The council chamber was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. The air thick with anticipation and hostility. Alaric could feel the weight of their collective judgment pressing down like atmosphere before a storm. At the far end of the room, Alara sat in a chair that had been specifically provided for her. Not at the council table where nobles sat, but not hidden away either. Visible, present, a living reminder of what this confrontation was actually about. Their eyes met across the distance. She gave him a slight nod. Not encouragement exactly, more like acknowledgement. We're in this together, whatever comes. Alaric took his position at the head of the council table. The room fell silent immediately. That much they still gave him. The authority of his presence, the weight of the Virmont name, but respect based on fear was fragile. And today he was going to test just how fragile it really was. Members of the council. Noble houses of the province. I've called this assembly to address the crisis that has consumed us these past weeks. Not just the conspiracy against Miss Whitcomb, though that's part of it, but the deeper issues. The fundamental questions about how we govern and who we serve. Lord Vancourt leaned forward. We know about Thomas Blackwell. We know he orchestrated the plot. What we don't know is what you plan to do about the underlying problems, the disruption you've caused, the traditions you've violated. I'm glad you asked, Alaric said, because I'm proposing something radical, a complete restructuring of how this province operates. The murmuring started immediately. Alaric raised his hand for silence. For 3 centuries, Virmont has been ruled by noble families who inherit their positions through bloodline. You sit at this table because your ancestors did. You wield power because of your last name, not because of your competence or contribution. That's how aristocracy works, Lady Cordelia said coldly. Bloodline ensures stability. Lineage maintains standards. Does it? Alaric challenged. Because from where I stand, bloodline has ensured stagnation, has maintained standards that no longer serve anyone except those already in power. The world is changing around us, and we're clinging to systems designed for a reality that no longer exists. He pulled out a document he'd spent the night preparing. I'm proposing the creation of a provincial council with seats reserved for non-noble members, merchants, educators, craftsmen, people who actually understand the economy that sustains us all. They won't have voting power on matters of succession or military command, but they will have voice on trade policy, taxation, and civic infrastructure. The room erupted, voices overlapping in outrage and disbelief. This is insanity. You're destroying centuries of tradition, giving commoners a voice in governance. Alaric let them vent, let the fury wash over him without reaction, because he'd expected this, had planned for it. The initial rejection was just the first wave. The real negotiation would come after. When the noise finally subsided, Lord Tremaine spoke. His voice was measured, thoughtful. What you're proposing isn't just reform, it's revolution. You're fundamentally altering the power structure that has governed this province since its founding. Yes, Alaric agreed, because that power structure is failing. Look at our economy. Merchant guilds generate more wealth than agricultural estates now. Look at our military. Professional soldiers are more effective than noble cavalry. Look at our future. The children being educated in merchant schools are smarter and more adaptable than most noble heirs. He leaned forward, his voice intense. We can either acknowledge reality and adapt, or we can cling to tradition until it strangles us. Those are the only options. Lord Bancroft stood, his face red. And you think you have the authority to make these changes? To overturn 300 years of governance because you've decided it's outdated? I think I have the responsibility to try. And I'm not demanding you accept these changes blindly. I'm proposing a vote. Democratic. Every house gets one vote regardless of size or wealth. If the majority rejects these reforms, I'll accept that decision. The room went silent, because Alaric had just done something unprecedented. He'd voluntarily limited his own power, had offered to be bound by consensus rather than imposing his will through ducal authority. It was a gamble, a massive one. If the vote went against him, he'd have publicly demonstrated that his vision was rejected by his own province. That would give the king grounds to intervene, to replace him with someone more amenable to traditional governance. But if the vote succeeded, he'd have legitimacy. Proof that change wasn't just his personal crusade, but the will of the governed. Marcus stood beside him. I second this proposal, and I pledge the support of House Viramont in its implementation. One by one, faces around the table shifted from outrage to calculation. They were politicians, after all, and politicians understood strategy even when they hated the game being played. Lord Vancourt was the next to speak. If we agree to this, what guarantees do we have? How do we know you won't keep pushing for more radical changes? That this isn't just the first step toward completely dismantling noble authority? You have my word, Alaric said. These reforms are the extent of what I'm proposing. No further restructuring, no additional seats for commoners. This is about creating a balance, not destroying the aristocracy. Your word, Cordelia said bitterly, has proven unreliable. You said you'd consider proper marriages. You said you valued tradition, and then you threw it all away for her. She gestured toward Alara with undisguised contempt. Yes, Alaric said quietly. I did. Because I learned that some things matter more than political convenience. But that doesn't make my word on governance unreliable. I'm offering you a compromise. A way forward that preserves noble authority while adapting to reality. And if we refuse, Bancroft asked, then you'll have chosen stagnation over evolution. And when the inevitable change comes, forced by economic collapse or popular uprising or royal intervention, you'll have no say in how it happens. At least this way, you control the process. It was a threat wrapped in pragmatism. Accept managed change or face chaotic transformation. Not a pleasant choice, but an honest one. The nobles conferred among themselves, whispered conversations spreading like ripples through the chamber, alliances forming and dissolving in real time as people calculated their positions. Alaric waited. This was the moment where everything either crystallized or shattered, where his vision either gained legitimacy or died stillborn. Finally, Lord Tremaine stood. As the eldest and most respected member of the council, his opinion carried weight. I've lived 83 years, he said slowly. I've seen 4 dukes rule Viramont. I've watched the world change in ways my father never imagined. And I've learned that the greatest danger isn't change itself. It's refusing to acknowledge when change is necessary. He looked directly at Alaric. I don't agree with everything you've done. I think your methods have been reckless, your judgment clouded. But I believe you're right about the fundamental issue. We cannot continue governing as if the world hasn't changed. So I vote yes. Let's try this experiment in evolution. The declaration shifted the entire room's energy. If Tremaine supported the reforms, others would follow. Not out of conviction necessarily, but out of recognition that the tide had turned. Lord Vancourt stood next. I vote yes. With reservations and the expectation that we'll revisit these reforms in 2 years to assess their effectiveness. Lady Cordelia remained seated, her expression thunderous, but even she could read the room. I vote no. This is a betrayal of everything our ancestors built, but I see I'm outnumbered. One by one, the houses declared their positions. Some enthusiastically, some reluctantly, some with visible anger. But when the count was complete, the result was clear. 17 yes, 8 no. The reforms would be implemented. Alaric felt something release in his chest. Not quite relief, more like the exhausted satisfaction of surviving a battle you weren't sure you'd win. Then it's decided, he said formally. The provincial council will be established within 3 months. Seats will be allocated based on economic contribution and expertise. And we will govern together, nobles and commoners alike, for the good of this province. The assembly dispersed slowly, people gathering in clusters to discuss what had just happened, to strategize their next moves, to adjust to a new reality they hadn't chosen but couldn't prevent. Alaric remained at the head of the table as the room emptied. Alara approached slowly, her expression unreadable. You did it, she said. We did it. This doesn't happen without you forcing me to see things differently. I didn't force anything. I just refused to pretend. That's the same thing, Alaric said with a slight smile. Refusing to pretend forces everyone around you to confront reality. So what happens now? Now we actually have to make this work. Build the new council. Prove that merit-based governance can function alongside aristocratic tradition. Navigate 100 complications we haven't even imagined yet. Sounds exhausting. Probably. They stood in the emptying chamber, two people who'd been thrown together by circumstance and had somehow forged something genuine from the chaos. There's something I need to say, Alaric began. These past weeks, I've used you. Not intentionally, but effectively. I made you a symbol of my rebellion against tradition, a weapon in my fight with the council. And that was wrong. Alara was quiet for a moment. Yes, it was. But I used you too. Used your power to gain influence I never could have achieved on my own. Used your protection to survive in a world designed to exclude me. We were both using each other. Does that make it better or worse? Neither. It makes it honest. We both got something we needed from this arrangement. The question is whether there's anything real underneath all the strategy and survival. Alaric considered this carefully, because it was the central question, the one they'd been dancing around since the beginning. Strip away the politics and the crisis and the grand gestures. What remained? I don't know, he admitted. I know I respect you. I know I value your counsel. I know I'm not willing to sacrifice you for political convenience, but is that love? Partnership? Or just mutual recognition between two people who see each other clearly? Maybe it's all of those things, Alara said. Maybe love isn't this grand romantic revelation. Maybe it's just choosing someone every day. Deciding their presence matters more than their absence would simplify things. That's a very pragmatic definition. I'm a very pragmatic person. Alaric smiled despite himself. So what are you choosing? He asked. Alara looked at him with those dark eyes that had first challenged him 6 months ago. I'm choosing to stay, to help you build this new council, to be your partner in this experiment, not because I'm swept away by passion or grand romantic gestures, but because I think we actually might succeed at something worthwhile. She paused. But I need you to understand something. I'm not staying as your Duchess. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'm staying as Alara Whitcomb, advisor and council member in her own right, with my own authority and my own voice. Can you accept that? It was a challenge, a test of whether he truly meant all his talk about equality and partnership, whether he could handle a relationship where he didn't have ultimate authority. Alaric thought about his father, about Thomas, about all the men who'd come before him who would have seen this as intolerable. A woman demanding equal footing, refusing to be possessed or controlled, and he realized he didn't want to be those men. Yes, he said simply, I can accept that, even if the council objects, if other houses see it as inappropriate, even then. Alara stepped closer, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her face, the toll these weeks had taken on her. Then we have an accord, partners in governance, equals in authority. Whatever else develops between us, we start there. Agreed. She held out her hand, formal and deliberate. He took it, the grip firm and sustained. The chamber was nearly empty now, just servants clearing away documents and extinguishing lamps. The machinery of power grinding forward, regardless of dramatic confrontations. There's one more thing, Alaric said, about my father, about the legacy Thomas thought he was protecting. He looked at Alara directly. I spent my entire life trying to be what everyone expected. The ruthless duke, the strategic genius, the man without weakness. And it nearly destroyed me. Made me into someone I didn't recognize. Someone I didn't like. She listened without interrupting. These past weeks, fighting for you, fighting for this reform, it's the first time I've felt like myself. Like the person I might have been if I hadn't been trained to see everything as power and control. So you're saying I saved you? No. I'm saying you gave me permission to save myself. There's a difference. Alara's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, you did the same for me. I spent my whole life fighting to be taken seriously, to prove I belonged in spaces designed to exclude me. And you saw me, didn't question my right to be there, didn't make me perform or prove anything. Maybe we needed each other, Alaric said. Maybe we did. They stood there in the dimming council chamber, holding hands like a promise neither fully understood yet. The door opened and Marcus entered. Sorry to interrupt, but the king's representatives are requesting a meeting. They want to discuss the council's decision. Of course they do, Alaric said. Send them to my study. I'll meet them in 10 minutes. Marcus nodded and left. Duty calls, Alara said. It always does. She squeezed his hand once and then released it, walked toward the exit with that same self-possessed grace that had first caught his attention. Alaric watched her go, then gathered his documents and headed to face the king's representatives, to explain and justify and defend. The endless work of governance that never stopped regardless of personal crisis. But something had shifted. The burden felt lighter now. Not because the work was easier, but because he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. The meeting with the king's representatives went better than expected. They were cautious but not hostile, interested in the reforms rather than automatically opposed. Apparently, word of Thomas's conspiracy had reached the capital, and the king's advisors saw value in a duke who could root out internal threats and implement change without requiring royal intervention. They would monitor the situation, report back to the crown. But for now, Alaric's authority was secure. It was a reprieve, not a victory. But it was enough. The weeks that followed were consumed with implementation, establishing the new council structure, selecting merchant representatives, navigating the 1,000 small conflicts that arose when people unused to sharing power were forced to compromise. Alara was invaluable. Her understanding of both noble politics and merchant concerns made her a natural mediator. She could translate between worlds in ways no one else could. And slowly, grudgingly, the system began to work. Merchants brought practical knowledge about trade and manufacturing. Nobles provided institutional memory and political connections. The combination was rough and imperfect, but it was functional. 3 months after the assembly, Alaric stood in his study reviewing the first joint proposal from the new council. A plan to modernize the province's roads and establish regular trade routes. It had input from both noble houses and merchant guilds. It was comprehensive, well-reasoned, and actually achievable. It was exactly what he'd hoped for. A knock at the door. Alara entered without waiting, carrying her own stack of documents. The Western merchants want assurances about tariff protections, she said, dropping into the chair across from his desk. And Lady Cordelia is making noise about increased representation for landed estates. Of course she is. What did you tell them? That we'd address it at next week's meeting? That both concerns were valid and would be given fair consideration. Diplomatic. I'm learning. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, reviewing proposals and making notes. It had become routine over the past months. This collaboration, this partnership. Can I ask you something? Alara said eventually. Always. Are you happy with how things turned out? Alaric set down his pen and considered the question seriously. Was he happy? He'd faced conspiracy, betrayal, near ruin. He'd lost Thomas, a man he'd trusted for decades. He'd made powerful enemies and uncertain allies. His relationship with Alara was undefined, somewhere between professional partnership and something deeper, neither wanted to name yet. But he'd also built something new, something that might actually matter. He'd proven that change was possible. That evolution didn't require destruction. I'm not sure happy is the right word, he said finally. But I'm at peace. For the first time in my life, I'm not performing a role or maintaining a facade. I'm just being myself. And that's worth everything I gave up to get here. Even Thomas? Even the risk to your title? Even that. Because I'd rather be genuinely myself and vulnerable than perfectly safe and hollow. Alara smiled. It was a real smile, not the careful political expression she wore in council meetings. That's growth. That's exhaustion, making me honest. Same thing. They returned to their work as evening deepened outside. The grounds of Viramont Hall stretched into darkness, but the lights in the main building burned bright. Work continued, the machinery of governance grinding forward. Later that night, Alaric walked the corridors of his ancestral home, past portraits of grim-faced ancestors who'd ruled through fear and absolute authority, past rooms where deals had been struck and enemies crushed and power consolidated. He wondered what they would think of him, whether they'd see him as weak or visionary, whether his reforms would be remembered as evolution or betrayal. Probably both. History was complicated that way. He found himself at Alara's chambers, knocked softly. She opened the door, already dressed for sleep, but clearly still working. Documents spread across her desk, lamp burning low. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Too much thinking. Come in." He entered and they sat by her fireplace, two people too wired to rest despite the late hour. "I've been thinking about what you asked earlier," Alaric said, "about being happy. And I realized something. I've spent my entire life chasing the wrong thing, which is control. I thought if I could just maintain perfect control over everything, people, politics, circumstances, then I'd be secure, safe. But control is an illusion. The harder you grip, the more slips through your fingers. So what's the alternative? Trust, I think. Trusting that things will work out even when you can't control them. Trusting other people to be competent and honest. Trusting yourself to adapt when things go wrong." He looked at her directly. "Trusting that partnership can be stronger than dominance." "Is this a declaration?" Alara asked softly. "It's an acknowledgement of what we've built together, of what we might build in the future if we're both willing. And what exactly are we building? Something real. Something that isn't defined by titles or political necessity. Something that's just us." Alara was quiet for a long moment, the firelight playing across her features. "I never expected this," she said finally. "When I walked into your council chamber 6 months ago to deliver a trade proposal, I never imagined any of this. Neither did I. But here we are. Here we are." She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkened grounds. "I need you to understand something, Alaric. I'm damaged by this. By the conspiracy, the accusations, the feeling of being hunted. It's going to take time to trust fully, to believe I'm actually safe here. I know. And I'm damaged too. By years of forcing myself to be something I wasn't, by losing Thomas, by realizing how fragile everything I built actually was." He joined her at the window. "But maybe damaged people can build something stronger than undamaged ones, because we know the cost. We understand fragility. That's either profound or completely delusional, probably both." They stood side by side, looking out at the estate that had been the center of so much conflict and transformation. "I'm not ready to call this love," Alara said quietly, "but I'm ready to call it possibility. The chance that we might build something worth the cost we've both paid." "That's enough," Alaric said. "That's more than enough." She turned to face him, her dark eyes searching his. "Then let's see where possibility leads." He kissed her then, softly, and without the desperate urgency of people trying to prove something. Just two people acknowledging what they'd survived together and what they might become. When they pulled apart, Alara smiled. "Well, that changes things." "Does it?" "Absolutely. Now we have to actually figure out what we are to each other. I thought we were partners in governance. We are. But we're also whatever this is, and that's going to complicate everything." "Good," Alaric said. "I'm tired of simple. Simple is boring. You're insane, completely." They spent the rest of the night talking. About the council, about the future, about all the complications and possibilities that lay ahead. And for the first time, those possibilities felt manageable instead of overwhelming, because they were facing them together. The next morning, Alaric convened a small meeting of his closest advisors, Marcus, Alara, and 3 of the new merchant council members. They gathered in the smaller conference room, more intimate than the Grand Council chamber. "We have a problem," one of the merchants said immediately. "The Western provinces are talking about implementing similar reforms. If this spreads, it could destabilize the entire regional power structure. Or it could create a new kind of stability," Alara countered, "based on cooperation rather than competition." The debate that followed was vigorous and honest. People disagreeing without personal attacks. Ideas challenged on merit rather than the status of who proposed them. It was exactly what Alaric had hoped the new system would create: honest governance. After the meeting dispersed, Marcus lingered. "You look different," he said. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like some burden you've been carrying forever finally got lifted." "Maybe it did." Marcus studied his brother with an expression Alaric couldn't quite read. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. "I know I've spent most of our lives being jealous and resentful, but watching you transform this province, watching you become someone who leads through conviction instead of fear, I'm genuinely proud." The word struck deep, because Marcus's approval had never mattered to Alaric before. Or at least, he'd never acknowledged that it mattered, but hearing it now felt significant. "Thank you," Alaric said, "and thank you for standing with me when it would have been easier to stand against me. We're brothers. That has to mean something beyond competition. It does now." Marcus left, and Alaric was alone with his thoughts. He walked to the window and looked out at Viramont, his ancestral home, the seat of power his family had held for 3 centuries. The legacy he'd been raised to preserve at any cost. And he'd changed it. Fundamentally. Irrevocably. His father would have been furious. Thomas had died angry. The ancestors in those grim portraits probably rolled in their graves. But Alaric felt no regret, because power without purpose was just tyranny. And he'd finally found his purpose, not in maintaining tradition or consolidating authority, but in building something better, something that served people instead of demanding their service. It wouldn't be easy. The reforms would face constant challenges. Other noble houses would resist. The king might eventually intervene. There would be setbacks and failures and moments where everything seemed about to collapse. But that was life. That was the cost of actually trying to change things instead of just maintaining them. And for the first time in his 33 years, Alaric Viramont was ready to pay that cost. That evening, as the household gathered for dinner, Alaric made an announcement. Effective immediately, Miss Elara Whitcomb is appointed chief advisor to the Duke of Viramont, with full authority on matters of trade, commerce, and civil governance. She will hold a permanent seat on the provincial council and will have direct access to all relevant documentation and deliberations. The gathered nobles and council members absorbed this in various states of acceptance and resignation. Some looked pleased, others troubled. But no one objected publicly, because the balance of power had shifted, and everyone understood it. Alara met his eyes across the table. She gave him a slight nod. Acknowledgement and acceptance. After dinner, they walked the grounds together. The winter air was sharp and clean, stars brilliant overhead. "You didn't have to make it official," Alara said. "Yes, I did. You've earned that position through competence and contribution. It was overdue. The council won't like sharing power with a former merchant's daughter. The council will adapt, or be replaced." "You've changed," she observed. "When I first met you, you were all calculation and control. Now you're just decisive. I learned that control was exhausting. Decisiveness is easier." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their breath misting in the cold air. "What happens next?" Alara asked. "We build, we work. We prove that this new system can function, and we see where that takes us. That's not much of a plan. It's the only plan that matters." She slipped her hand into his. The gesture was simple but significant, a public acknowledgement of whatever they were becoming to each other. "Then I suppose we'd better get started," she said. "I suppose we should." They stood there on the grounds of Viramont Hall, 2 people who'd been forced together by crisis and had forged something genuine from chaos. The estate stretched around them in all directions. Land that had seen generations of brutal efficiency and ruthless power. And now it would see something different. Evolution instead of stagnation. Partnership instead of domination. The courage to change instead of the cowardice of clinging to tradition. It wouldn't be perfect. Nothing built by flawed humans ever was. But it would be real and honest and worth fighting for. Which was all anyone could ask. The stars turned overhead. Winter deepened. The world continued its endless rotation. And in Viramont Hall, something new was being born from the ruins of something old. Not with violence or revolution, but with the quiet, persistent work of people who refused to accept that things had to remain as they'd always been. That was the real power, Alaric realized. Not the ability to force others to submit, but the courage to change yourself and invite others to join you. And as he stood there with Alara beside him, looking out at the future they would build together, Duke Alaric Viramont finally understood what his father and all the grim ancestors had never grasped. True strength wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about being willing to break and rebuild yourself into something better. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. And it was finally, beautifully, his.